She was fired in front of 40 people for stealing an empty box. No money inside, no merchandise, no evidence, just cardboard. The kind you'd toss in a dumpster without thinking twice. But they screamed at her like she'd robbed a bank. And she stood there, chin up, hand steady, and proved every single one of them wrong, without raising her voice once. The billionaire watching from the shadows didn't know her name yet, but in 30 seconds she would remind him of a promise he'd buried so deep he'd convinced himself it never existed. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit like, and let's begin. The warehouse smelled like rust and old rubber. That specific combination you only find in buildings that have been working too hard for too long without anyone bothering to say thank you. Adrian Ashcroft noticed it the moment he stepped out of his car. He always noticed things like that. It was a habit built over years of learning that the details most people walked past were usually the ones that mattered most. He didn't announce himself. He never did on these visits. His assistant Marcus had offered to call ahead. "Give them time to prepare, Mr. Ashcroft." And Adrian had said no the same way he always said no to that suggestion. Flat, final, moving on. He was wearing a navy jacket over a plain gray shirt, dark jeans, unremarkable shoes. Nothing that said billionaire. Nothing that said, I own this building and everything inside it. He liked it that way. Visibility was a tool, and right now he wasn't here to be visible. He was here to see. Ashcroft Logistics occupied a full city block on the east side of Detroit, 3 interconnected warehouse structures connected by covered loading bays, 600 employees across 2 shifts, and a reputation in the freight industry for reliability that Adrian had spent 11 years earning 1 delivered shipment at a time. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest work, or it was supposed to be. He'd been hearing things lately, small things, workers quitting after 3 months without explanation, a discrepancy in the third quarter inventory audit that his internal team had flagged and then quietly unflagged. A middle manager named Greer, whose numbers were consistently clean in a way that Adrian's experience told him numbers were never actually clean. He was here to look. Nothing more. Just look. He slipped in through a side entrance using a key card that bypassed the main reception desk, nodded to a forklift operator who barely glanced up, and began making his way down the central corridor between 2 rows of steel shelving stacked floor to ceiling with packaged freight. That was when he heard it. Not arguing exactly. Something more raw than arguing. The kind of noise a crowd makes when it smells something it wants to bite. It was coming from the break area near the back loading dock, a wide, poorly lit space with vending machines, folding tables, and a row of lockers that had been there since the building opened in 1987 and hadn't been painted since. Adrian rounded the corner and stopped. There were maybe 40 people gathered, not gathered the way people gather around a birthday cake, gathered the way people gather around an accident. At the center of it stood a man Adrian recognized immediately, Dennis Greer, shift supervisor. Mid-40s, built like someone who used to play football, and had been slowly losing that argument with gravity ever since. He was wearing his company polo like a uniform, and he was holding a cardboard box, the flat folded kind that shipping departments generate by the thousands. And his face was arranged in the specific expression that certain people wear when they believe they have finally, conclusively, caught someone they have wanted to catch for a long time. Standing 3 feet away from him was a woman Adrian didn't recognize. She was around 30, maybe slightly under, average height, dark hair pulled back, a few strands loose where a long day of work had won out over whatever she'd done with it that morning. Her clothes were clean but not new, dark work trousers and a burgundy top that had been washed enough times to lose the brightness it probably came with. She wasn't small, but standing inside that circle of staring coworkers with Greer looming across from her and his voice at full volume, she looked like something being reduced. "Security's on their way," Greer announced to the room, projecting like a man who was enjoying the audience. "We caught her, coming out of the freight prep area with company merchandise." "I told you," the woman started. "I don't need you to tell me anything." Greer didn't even look at her when he cut her off. He looked at the crowd. 3 previous warnings. 3. And now she walks out with company property in her hands, thinking no one's going to check. He shook the box slightly, as if the weight of it was the whole argument. "I think everybody here deserves to know what kind of people we're working with. The crowd did what crowds do. Some people looked uncomfortable. Most just watched. "It's an empty box," the woman said. "You are taking company property off the premises. An empty box." Her voice didn't rise. That was the thing Adrian noticed first. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't crying. She wasn't doing any of the things that people do when they're cornered and scared and desperate for someone to believe them. She was just standing there with her arms at her sides, and her voice was level, and she looked at Greer the way you look at someone who is lying and knows it and doesn't care. "Open it." Greer blinked. "Excuse me?" "Open the box," she said again. "Right now in front of everyone. Open it and show them what's inside." Something flickered across Greer's face. Not guilt exactly. More like the micro-expression of a man recalculating. That's not the point. Then what is the point? She took a half step forward. She wasn't aggressive, but she wasn't retreating either. "You told everyone in this room that I stole company merchandise. That box is the evidence. Open it." Nobody moved. She reached forward and took the box from his hands. Not grabbed it, not snatched it. Just took it the way you take something that belongs to you. She set it on the nearest folding table, unfolded the flaps, and turned it upside down. Nothing fell out. Not a single thing. The box was empty. Adrian stood very still near the back of the crowd. The woman pulled a folded piece of paper from her back pocket and held it up. "Waste packaging, pre-approved by warehouse management for reuse. The paper trail is in the system. You can check it right now." She looked around the circle of watching faces, unhurried. "I work at a shelter 4 nights a week. We use cardboard for insulation and for building cribs for newborns whose mothers don't have anything else. That's what the box was for." Silence. Then, from somewhere in the back of the crowd, a man in his 30s who Adrian had never seen before muttered, "Dude, it was empty." The energy shifted, not dramatically, not like a movie, just the slow, awkward way group momentum shifts when a crowd realizes it has been watching something embarrassing. Greer opened his mouth. Nothing useful came out. "I'm going to clock out now," the woman said. She folded the cardboard back flat, tucked it under her arm, picked up the piece of paper, and walked out of the break area like there was somewhere else she needed to be. She didn't look at Greer again. She didn't look at the crowd. Adrian watched her go, and he felt something move in his chest that he hadn't felt in a long time. He wasn't sure what to call it. He filed it away for later and slipped back into the corridor, pulling out his phone. He had some questions he needed answered about Dennis Greer. Her name was Emily Carter. He had Marcus pull her employee file in the car on the way home. 20 minutes of reading, and Adrian knew the shape of her life on paper. A single woman from the Brightmoor neighborhood of Detroit, 6 years with the company, a work record that was, with the exception of 3 disciplinary notes in the last 14 months, all filed by Greer, genuinely clean. Prior to those notes, not a mark on her file. He sat with that for a moment. 3 disciplinary notes in 14 months from the same supervisor. No prior issues in 5 years. He knew what that looked like. He'd seen it before, in businesses he'd acquired, in situations he'd had to clean up. It was the fingerprint of someone building a case, brick by brick, file by file, setting up the scaffolding for a fall before you ever pushed anyone off. He didn't say anything to Marcus about it. He didn't say anything to anyone. He closed the file and looked out the window at Detroit running past in the October dark. He had a 7-year-old son at home who would have had dinner already and would be approximately 30 minutes from the point where staying awake became a genuine battle of will. His name was Noah, and on most nights Adrian was home by 6:30 to do bath time, and the negotiation about pajama choices that had somehow become a ritual both of them pretended to take seriously. He'd missed it tonight. Rosa, their housekeeper, and the closest thing to a consistent female presence Noah had known since he was 3, would have managed it, but managed wasn't the same as home. He told himself he'd be there by 8. He was usually right about those promises, maybe 60% of the time. But as the car moved west through the city, Adrian found himself saying something he hadn't planned to say. "Don't go to the house yet." Marcus looked in the rearview mirror. "Sir?" "Just give me a minute." He was watching a burgundy top moving along the sidewalk about half a block ahead of them. A cardboard box tucked under one arm, a bag over the other shoulder, walking at the pace of someone who is tired but not stopping. Emily Carter was walking home. He wasn't sure what made him say it. He told himself later it was due diligence. He needed to understand more about the situation before he could make a decision about Greer, and watching her for a few minutes would give him context he didn't have yet. He believed about 40% of that explanation. The rest of it was something he couldn't quite put a name to. "Just drive slow," he said. Marcus drove slow. She walked for about 8 minutes before she turned off the main road into a residential block that had seen better decades. The houses were small and older, a few of them well-maintained, a few of them carrying the specific visual fatigue of places where the cost of repairs keeps getting deferred because other costs are more urgent. She stopped in front of a low, wide building that might have been a church hall at some point in its history. It had that functional, humble shape, with a hand-painted sign above the door that Adrian had to angle his head to read. Helping Hands Shelter. Families Welcome. There were lights on inside. Through the windows, Adrian could see movement, the shadowy presence of multiple people, the specific soft chaos of somewhere that was both living space and communal area at the same time. Emily Carter knocked, which surprised him. She knocked at what was clearly a place she was known, where she worked, where she had presumably been dozens or hundreds of times. She knocked because she was carrying a box and her hands were full, and the knock was the signal, not the formality. A girl of maybe 12 opened the door, skinny, wearing a sweatshirt that was 3 sizes too big, and said something that made Emily laugh. A quick, real laugh, not the polished version people perform in public, the actual one. She went inside. Adrian sat in the car in the dark for a moment. "You need me to do something?" Marcus asked carefully. "Pull the name of whoever founded that shelter," Adrian said, "and then take me home. I need to see my son." Noah was still awake, predictably. He was sitting cross-legged on his bed with a book propped against his knees, wearing the dinosaur pajamas he'd chosen every night this week, despite having 12 other options. And he looked up when Adrian came in with the particular expression of a child who knows he's winning the bedtime battle and is trying not to make it too obvious. "You're late," Noah said. "I know. Rosa said you had work stuff." "I did." "Was it important?" Adrian sat on the edge of the bed, which was the invitation Noah had been waiting for, because he immediately rearranged himself so that he was leaning against his father's arm. He was small for 7. He had his mother's eyes, the specific dark brown that shifted toward gold in good light, and Adrian felt the familiar pressure in his chest that he always felt when he looked at his son and saw her. He never said it out loud. He didn't think Noah needed to carry that. "Somewhat important," Adrian said. "More important than bath time?" "No." "You're just saying that." "I am saying it. Doesn't mean it's not true." Noah considered this with the gravity of a child working through a logic problem. "Okay," he said eventually. Adrian looked at the book Noah was pretending to read. "What's this one?" "It's about a boy who finds a door in the back of a mountain that nobody else can see." Noah turned a page for effect. He doesn't know if he should go through it. "What would you do?" Noah gave him a look like the answer was obvious. "Go through it," he said. "That's what the story's for." Adrian was quiet for a moment. Outside, October Detroit was doing something with the wind that rattled the windows slightly, and the house around them made the small sounds that houses make when they're settling in for the night. "Dad?" Noah said. "Yeah." "Are you sad about something?" Adrian looked at him. "What makes you ask?" "You've got your face." "What face?" "The one you get when you're thinking about something that happened a long time ago." 7 years old. Adrian sometimes forgot how closely children watch the adults they love, cataloging every micro-expression because those are the maps they use to navigate the world. "I'm okay," Adrian said. "Go to sleep." He stayed until Noah's breathing changed, which took about 9 minutes, and then he sat in the quiet for a while before he pulled out his phone and typed a name into the search bar. Helping Hands Shelter, Detroit. The results were sparse. A brief local news mention from 11 years ago, a city permit application, and one older article from a neighborhood newsletter, the kind that gets scanned and uploaded by a volunteer and formatted incorrectly and has maybe 40 readers, with a photograph of an older woman standing in front of what looked like the same building he'd sat outside tonight. The caption read, "Margaret Okafor, founder, helping hands shelter. Every mother deserves a door that opens. Adrian looked at the photograph for a long time. He knew that face. He hadn't thought about it in almost 28 years, but he knew that face. The room felt different after that, smaller, like the walls had moved closer without moving at all. He set the phone face down on his knee and sat in the dark of his son's room for a very long time. He was 11 years old when his mother got sick. He didn't have language for it at the time. He didn't know the clinical name or the stages or the specific way the disease moved through her body like something methodical and indifferent. He just knew that she had been one way, warm and loud and prone to making breakfast at 6:30 in the morning with the radio on too loud. And then she became a different way. Quieter, slower, smaller inside her own skin. His father had been gone since Adrian was 6. Not dead, just gone in the way that some men are gone. There one morning and not there after that, and the space they leave behind slowly fills with other things until a child starts to forget what the space was shaped like in the first place. They were living in Brightmoor then. Not the same block as Emily Carter, but close. Close enough that Adrian knew, even as a child, that they were on the wrong side of the line that separated neighborhoods that were struggling from neighborhoods that had given up on the fight. His mother's name was Patricia. She had worked 2 jobs before she got sick. After, she could barely manage one shift at the laundromat where she'd been working for 3 years, and even that became inconsistent, and the money got thin in a way that Adrian felt in his stomach every time he opened the refrigerator and did the math of what was left and how many days until the end of the month. He started doing things he wasn't proud of. Small things first, then less small things. He was a child, and he was frightened, and he was watching his mother disappear by degrees, and fear makes you calculate differently. He wasn't a bad kid. He was a scared one. There's a difference, though the result can look the same from a distance. It was a woman who stopped him. He'd been in the process of lifting something from the back of a delivery truck. A box of canned goods, basic stuff, exactly what they needed, when a hand landed on his shoulder. Not hard, not violent, just present. He spun around, certain it was a police officer, certain his life was about to collapse into the specific shape that takes years to escape. It was an older woman, Nigerian accent, wide face, kind eyes, and the specific posture of someone who is not afraid and is not surprised and is not angry. She looked at him the way no adult had looked at him in a long time. Not with pity, not with disgust, but with the straightforward attention of someone deciding what this situation actually was. "What's your name?" she said. He told her. "How old are you?" He told her. "Is your mother home?" He didn't answer that. "Come with me," she said. And he did. He didn't know why. Maybe because she didn't give him a reason not to. Her name was Margaret Okafor. She ran a small community program out of a building that barely qualified as a building, more of a repurposed gathering space with folding tables and donated food and walls that could have used 2 coats of paint in 1995 and had not received them. She brought Adrian in, sat him down, and listened to him describe his situation with the thoroughness and patience of someone who had heard hundreds of versions of this same story and knew that each one mattered individually. Then she drove him home and sat with his mother for an hour. Adrian never fully knew what they talked about. He sat in the kitchen and listened to the low murmur of voices from the other room and felt something in his chest loosen that he hadn't realized was wound tight. After that, Margaret came regularly. She arranged access to food assistance programs his mother hadn't known existed. She connected them with a doctor who agreed to see Patricia on a sliding scale fee. She spent 2 Saturday mornings helping Adrian with the math homework he'd been too exhausted to keep up with, because a child who is worried about where the next meal is coming from cannot think about algebra, and she understood that, and she fixed both problems simultaneously. His mother recovered. Not completely. There were lasting effects, things that never came back entirely. But she lived, she worked, she watched her son grow up. The night before the family moved to a different neighborhood, a better one, the first step in a very long staircase that would take Adrian 15 years to climb, he stood at Margaret's door. "I'm going to come back," he told her. He was 11 years old, and he meant every word of it with the total sincerity that only children can sustain. "When I'm older, I'm going to come back and I'm going to help you the way you helped us. Margaret had smiled at him. Not the smile of someone humoring a child, the smile of someone filing something important away for safekeeping. I know you will, she'd said. He had not come back. Not at 15, not at 20, not at 25 when he'd sold his first company for enough money to have actually done something meaningful. He had moved forward the way people move forward, by not looking back, by telling himself there would be time later, by filling his life with problems that were immediate and demands that were urgent and a grief that he hadn't finished processing, and Margaret Okafor and Brightmore and the boy he used to be had slipped below the surface of his daily life like objects dropped in deep water. Until tonight. Until a woman carrying an empty cardboard box walked into a shelter that Margaret had built and laughed a real laugh at the door. He didn't sleep much that night. At 3 a.m, he was sitting at the desk in his home office with the city spread out below the window, his laptop open to a spreadsheet he wasn't reading, a cup of coffee going cold on the corner of the desk. He thought about Margaret. He thought about what it means to be 11 years old and have someone see you. Actually see you, not the situation, not the problem, not the liability. And decide that you matter enough to stop. He thought about what it means to promise a thing and then live your life in a direction that makes the promise smaller and smaller until it fits in a place where you don't have to look at it. He was a billionaire. He had been a billionaire for 4 years, though the money had been accumulating for longer than that. He had people who managed his charitable giving, a foundation, a PR strategy, a portfolio of donations that were largely excellent in theory and largely invisible in practice, because he'd let other people choose them, and other people's choices were never the ones that actually mattered to you personally. He'd never gone back to Brightmore. He'd never looked for Margaret Okafor. He'd never even tried. He sat with the shame of that for a while, because he thought he'd earned it, and then he picked up his phone and called Marcus. It was 3:45 in the morning. Marcus answered on the second ring because Marcus had been his assistant for 6 years and had made peace with the hours. I need everything you can find on a woman named Margaret Okafor, Adrian said, connected to a shelter on the west side called Helping Hands. History, current status, the whole picture. Timeline? Marcus asked. Morning. I'll have it by 7. Adrian put the phone down and looked at the city. Somewhere out there, Emily Carter was probably sleeping. Somewhere in the same city, a supervisor named Dennis Greer was probably sleeping. And somewhere, he didn't know exactly where, there was an older woman who had once driven him home and sat with his dying mother and never asked for a single thing in return. He hadn't forgotten her. He'd just done something worse than forgetting. He'd remembered and kept moving anyway. Marcus's report landed at 6:53 the next morning, 8 pages, tight and thorough. Margaret Okafor was 74 years old. She had founded Helping Hands Shelter in 1998 after spending a decade working with city social services. The shelter had operated continuously for 26 years, serving primarily homeless mothers with young children. It had survived 2 rounds of city funding cuts, one structural issue with the roof, and a period in 2019 when Margaret had been hospitalized for 3 months, and a small group of volunteers had kept it running through sheer stubbornness. She was in declining health now. Not critical, but diminished. Reduced mobility, some cognitive effects from a minor stroke the previous year. She still came to the shelter several evenings a week. She didn't run it anymore. She sat in a specific chair near the window and talked to the residents and, by all accounts, was still the reason the place held together emotionally even when she couldn't manage it physically. The shelter had a permanent staff of 2. It ran almost entirely on volunteer labor. Emily Carter had been volunteering there for 3 years, 4 or 5 nights a week after her warehouse shift. She contributed money too, a portion of her income, according to a brief mention in the newsletter article Marcus had found. And she had apparently been the driving force behind a project to repurpose cardboard from shipping facilities into makeshift furniture and infant sleeping spaces for mothers who arrived with nothing. Adrian read that paragraph twice. She'd been taking those boxes home for months. Every piece of cardboard she could get legitimately, every scrap of packaging material that the warehouse was otherwise going to landfill. She had a standing permission from the department manager. Marcus had found the internal approval in the company's system, a casual email exchange from 8 months ago that had probably taken 4 minutes to arrange. Greer had either not known about it or had known and chosen the moment carefully. Adrian looked out his office window at the morning Detroit sky, the kind of October sky that can't quite decide between blue and gray. He thought about the way Emily Carter had taken the box from Greer's hands, the specific economy of that gesture. No drama, no performance, just the calm motion of someone who was tired of being made to feel like she was something less than what she was. He thought about a woman who gave a significant portion of a modest income to a shelter, who spent her evenings building makeshift cribs out of cardboard for children whose mothers had nothing, who caught a thief but brought the evidence to the person who needed it instead of burning the building down with it. That last part he didn't know yet, but he was going to learn it soon. He picked up his phone. "Set up a meeting with Dennis Greer," he said when Marcus answered. "Today, 2 o'clock. Don't tell him why." "Yes, sir." "And Marcus?" He paused. "I want the complete inventory audit for the last 2 years, not the cleaned version, the raw data." A brief silence. "I'll need to go around the standard reporting chain for that." "I know, do it anyway." He hung up, and for the first time in several years, he felt something he recognized as the particular uncomfortable clarity of a person who is about to stop being comfortable. He took Noah to school himself that morning. Rosa offered, she always offered. But he shook his head and went upstairs to where Noah was wrestling with his backpack zipper with the focused irritation of someone who was losing a very personal battle. "Let me," Adrian said, and crouched down and fixed the zipper and handed the bag back. "Thanks," Noah said, with the specific tone of a 7-year-old who is trying to seem like he would have figured it out anyway. They drove to school mostly in a comfortable quiet, Noah watching the city out the window with the absent curiosity of a child who is thinking about 17 things at once and not particularly invested in any of them. Then Noah said, out of nowhere, "Dad, what happened to Grandma Patricia?" Adrian's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "You know what happened, buddy. She got sick when I was a kid." "But she got better?" "She got better, yeah." "How?" He stopped at a red light. On the corner, a woman was waiting for a bus with a toddler on her hip and a bag at her feet, and the specific stance of someone managing approximately 4 more tasks than any one person should have to manage at once. "Someone helped her," Adrian said. "Who?" "A woman. A very good woman who saw that we needed help and decided to help." Noah thought about this. "Did you say thank you?" "Yes," Adrian said. Then, because Noah deserved better than a comfortable lie, "Not well enough. Not nearly well enough." The light changed. They drove. Noah seemed to be processing something. "You should fix that," Noah said eventually. "If someone helped your mom, you should fix that." Adrian looked at his son in the rear-view mirror, 7 years old, wearing the dinosaur backpack, watching the city like it owed him information. "Yeah," Adrian said. "I know." The meeting with Greer was set for 2 o'clock, but the raw inventory data Marcus pulled told a story that didn't need a meeting to be understood. He spent 4 hours with a forensic accountant his legal team trusted, a quiet, precise man named Franklin, who wore the same expression whether he was discussing a parking ticket or a federal charge, and who had never once in 6 years delivered news in a way that made it feel larger or smaller than it actually was. Franklin went through the data without preamble and without theater. The numbers had been altered, not clumsily. This was someone who understood the system well enough to make the adjustments look like rounding errors and inventory discrepancies, the kind of minor noise that any large warehouse generates and that auditors tend to wave past. But when you looked at it across 24 months, when you tracked the specific categories and the specific dates, the shape of it became visible. Freight had been disappearing, not individual packages that would be too obvious and too hard. Entire pallets on specific dates recorded as damaged or returned or missing in transit. Some of those pallets had corresponding damage reports, all filed by or through Greer's shift. Some of them simply had no documentation at all, entries that had been retroactively deleted from the system in a way that Franklin said was technically sophisticated and practically invisible unless you knew to look for it. "Best estimate?" Adrian asked. Franklin looked at his notes. 18 months of clear evidence, could be longer, but the record-keeping inconsistencies before that point make it harder to distinguish deliberate alteration from normal data degradation. He paused. "Rough total, somewhere between $800,000 and $1.2 million. Adrian sat with that number. And the people he blamed, he said, the employees who got filed against. Franklin turned to a different section of his notes. I cross-referenced the disciplinary files with the dates of the inventory losses. 7 employees total in the clear evidence window who received formal warnings or terminations for inventory discrepancies. 4 are no longer with the company. He looked up over his glasses. The warnings all correspond to dates within 2 weeks of a significant inventory loss. He was covering his tracks. 7 people. Emily Carter was the most recent, but there had been 6 before her, and 4 of them had lost their jobs. Adrian stood up and walked to the window. He looked out at the city for a moment, and then he turned around. Cancel the 2 o'clock, he said. Franklin raised an eyebrow. I'm not sitting down with him, Adrian said. Not yet, not before I know everything. He went back to the shelter that evening. He didn't go inside. He sat in the car down the block, which he recognized was behavior that in a different context would be concerning, but his intentions were not concerning, and he was working through something that didn't have a cleaner process available. He wasn't sure what he was waiting for. He wasn't sure what he expected to feel. The building looked smaller and more tired in the evening light than it had the night before. The hand-painted sign above the door had a slight lean to it on one end, like whoever had hung it had been working from a ladder that wasn't quite straight and had run out of time to adjust it. In the windows, the movement of the previous night was still there, the same soft, inhabited motion that distinguished a place where people actually live from a place that is merely being maintained. After about 20 minutes, Emily Carter came out. She sat on the front steps and ate something from a container. Leftovers, the kind of thing you packed the night before and forget is in your bag until you're hungry enough to remember. She ate without looking at her phone, which Adrian found unusual and oddly notable, the specific stillness of a person comfortable with their own thoughts. A few minutes later, an older woman appeared in the doorway behind her. She was moving slowly, one hand on the doorframe, and she was smaller than Adrian remembered, shrunken in the way that time shrinks people, redistributing them. But the posture was there, still, the central spine posture of a woman who had never found the need to make herself smaller for anyone's comfort. And the face, like the same wide face, the same quality of attention in the eyes, even from 60 feet away in fading light. Margaret Okafor sat down on the steps beside Emily Carter. They talked. Adrian couldn't hear it. He watched the shape of it. The easy familiarity, Emily saying something that made Margaret shake her head slowly with what even from a distance was clearly a kind of love. Margaret saying something that made Emily put down her food container and look at the older woman with that particular expression that is not quite worry and not quite sadness and not quite tenderness, but contains all 3. Adrian watched them for a long time. Then he looked at his phone. Noah's bedtime was in 40 minutes. He pulled away from the curb and drove home, and he didn't turn the radio on, and he didn't answer the 3 work calls that came in during the drive. And when he got home and Noah came running down the hallway in the dinosaur pajamas, again, definitively, Adrian picked him up and held on for longer than usual. "Dad," Noah said, muffled against his shoulder. "Yeah." "You're squishing me." "I know." He held on for another few seconds anyway. The next morning, Adrian Ashcroft did something he had not done in 28 years. He drove to Brightmoor. Not to the shelter, not yet. To the block where he'd grown up. He sat in the car in front of the house, which was now a different color, and had a fence that hadn't been there in 1996, and a small garden in the front yard that in October looked cold and stripped down, but was clearly tended by someone who cared about it. He sat there for maybe 5 minutes. He wasn't doing it for nostalgia. He was doing it because he needed to make the past physical again, needed to feel the actual weight of what he'd walked away from when he built a future for himself without going back for what he owed. His mother had died 6 years ago. A different illness from the first one, and this time the story had not ended the way the first one did. She had been proud of him. She had told people about him with the specific embarrassing enthusiasm that only mothers can sustain, and he had given her a comfortable life for the last 12 years of hers, and he had been at her bedside at the end. But she had never known about Margaret. He'd never told her the whole story. Who had really come to the door that night, what that woman had done. How precisely she had made the calls and arranged the access, and sat in the kitchen teaching a scared 11-year-old algebra on a Saturday morning. He'd summarized it at some point as "a neighbor helped out," because the full story was too large, and he'd already been storing it in the place where he put things he couldn't look at directly. He pulled out of the block and drove to the shelter. He knocked on the door. The same 12-year-old from 2 nights ago answered it, squinting at him with the frank assessment that children reserve for strangers who turn up unexpectedly at the door. "Is Emily Carter here?" Adrian asked. "Who are you?" "Fair question." "My name is Adrian Ashcroft," he said. I work in logistics. Tell her it's about the situation at the warehouse." The girl gave him one more long look, decided something, and went inside. He waited on the step. He heard footsteps. Then the door opened wider. Emily Carter looked at him with an expression he couldn't immediately read. She looked different here than she had at the warehouse. She'd changed out of the work clothes, she looked rested in a relative sense, and here, on her own turf, the quiet dignity that he'd first noticed in that break room was less of a stance and more of a state. She looked like herself. She looked at him carefully, and then she said, "You were at the warehouse." Not a question. "Yes," he said. "I saw you when I was walking out." She leaned against the doorframe, unhurried. "I thought you might be security." "I'm not security." "No," she said. "I figured that out when no one came after me." She studied him for another moment. "What do you want?" "I want to talk to you about Dennis Greer," he said, "and I want to tell you the truth about who I am. Can I come in?" She was quiet for a moment, measuring something. "You can come in," she said, "but I'm going to say something before you do." "Okay." "I don't need a hero," Emily said. "Whatever you think you saw back there, I handled it. If you're here to offer me something in exchange for my gratitude, you can keep driving." Adrian looked at her. Something that might have been a smile moved across his face, brief and genuine. "I'm not here to offer you anything," he said. "I'm here because I think you have information I need, and I think you probably have evidence I don't yet. And I'm here because—" He paused. He hadn't planned this particular sentence. "I'm here because I owe a debt to this building that I've been ignoring for 28 years, and I don't have the right to walk in the front door without telling you that." Emily looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped back and let him inside. The shelter smelled like soup and old wood and something Adrian couldn't name, the specific warmth of a space that has been lived in by too many people to belong to any single one of them. It wasn't an unpleasant smell. It was the smell of accumulation, of need met repeatedly over a long period of time until it became ordinary. Emily led him through a short hallway past a bulletin board dense with paper, schedules, resource lists, hand-drawn pictures from children who'd apparently been given crayons and instructions to fill the space, and into a small room that served as something between an office and a storage closet. There was a folding table, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet with a sticker on the bottom drawer that read, "Fragile. Bottom drawer is broken in marker," and a single overhead light that was doing its best. Emily sat in one of the chairs without ceremony and looked at him. He sat across from her and looked back. For a moment, neither of them said anything, and Adrian noticed that she was comfortable with that. She wasn't filling the silence, wasn't managing it. She was just waiting for him to say what he'd come to say, and she'd decide what to do with it after. "My name is Adrian Ashcroft," he said. "I own the warehouse." She didn't react the way most people did when they found out they were sitting across from the owner of the company that employed them. No flash of deference, no visible recalculation. She just looked at him steadily and said, "I know." He paused. "You know? I recognized you when you walked in the door tonight." She folded her hands on the table. "You've been photographed at industry events. I looked you up when I started working there, the way you do when you want to know who's actually running a place." She held his gaze. "I also saw your car parked down the block 2 nights ago, and last night." Something in Adrian's chest did a small, uncomfortable rearrangement. "That looks worse than it is." "Maybe," Emily said. "Tell me what it is, then." He told her about following her the first night, honest about it, without dressing it up as something more professional than it was. He told her about Margaret's photograph in the newsletter. He told her about being 11 years old in Brightmoor, about his mother, about the woman who came to the door and changed the shape of what was possible for a frightened kid and his dying mother, and about the promise he'd made on the front step when they were leaving, and how that promise had lived in him like a small stone for 28 years, present enough to know it was there, buried deep enough that he'd managed not to do anything about it. Emily listened. She didn't interrupt, and she didn't perform sympathy, and she didn't give him the absolution that people often offer when someone tells them something they feel guilty about. She just listened. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Miss Margaret never told me that story," she said finally. She might not remember it. It was a long time ago, and there have been a lot of children in that time. "She remembers every one of them," Emily said, and there was something in her voice that wasn't quite sharp, but wasn't gentle either, just certain. "She doesn't talk about them because she doesn't collect them. She just remembers." Adrian took that. He deserved it. "I need to ask you something," he said, "about Greer." She shifted slightly. Not defensiveness, just the adjustment of someone who has been sitting with something uncomfortable and isn't surprised to be asked about it directly. "What do you want to know? How long has it been happening? The real version, not the disciplinary file version." She looked at him for a moment, making some private decision about how much she trusted this man in this small room, in this shelter that had nothing to do with him yet. Then she leaned back in her chair and said, 14 months that I know about. It might be longer, but 14 months ago is when I first noticed something that didn't add up." "What did you notice?" "Pallets going out on night shifts that weren't on the manifest. I thought it was a data entry error first because that happens. But then it happened again, different category, different night, and both times the shift was Greer's." She paused. "I mentioned it to another supervisor once, casually, the way you would if you genuinely thought it was a mistake. He went quiet in a way that told me it wasn't a mistake, and he wasn't going to help me." She looked down at the table. "That was the week I got my first disciplinary warning. Tardiness. I was never tardy. My clock-in record is perfect. The warnings were retaliation. Obviously." She said it without bitterness, which was somehow worse. "I couldn't prove it. You can't prove something like that without access to the data I don't have access to, so I started keeping my own records." She got up and went to the filing cabinet, the working drawer, not the broken one, and pulled out a manila folder. She set it on the table and slid it across to him. He opened it. Inside were printouts, handwritten notes, photographs taken on a phone, some blurry, some clear enough. Dates, times, partial manifest numbers. Cargo descriptions written in a small, precise handwriting that matched the precision he was beginning to understand was simply who Emily Carter was. "You built a case," he said. "I built what I could build," she said. "It's not complete. It's enough to point at something, but it's not enough to end someone's career and walk away confident. I needed access to the full system to make it complete, and I was never going to have that access." She sat back down. "Then the video happened, and I lost my job, and I figured that was Greer finishing what he started before I could do anything with what I had." Adrian looked up from the folder. "What video?" She showed him on her phone. It was 43 seconds long, shot on someone else's phone inside the warehouse. The angle was high and partial. Whoever filmed it had done so without Emily knowing. It showed, or appeared to show, Emily Carter in the freight prep area, leaning over a pallet, putting something into a bag. It looked like stealing. If you didn't know anything about Emily Carter, if you didn't know about the shelter or the cardboard, or the 8 months of working with scrap packaging with a standing approval from management, if you watched 43 seconds of grainy phone footage with no context, it looked like stealing. The video had gone up on social media 3 days ago, posted by an account Adrian didn't recognize, and it had been shared enough times to generate comments that ranged from disappointed to vicious. People tagging the company's social media pages, people calling for action, people who had never set foot inside a logistics warehouse and had never met Emily Carter making confident pronouncements about her character in the tone that social media enables and then discards. The comments were the kind Adrian had learned to avoid reading, not because they weren't real, but because reading them at length produced a specific kind of anger that wasn't useful. "They took the job too," he said. "After the video?" "The same day." Emily's voice was flat, not defeated, just describing a thing that had happened. Greer sent the termination notice by end of shift, said the video constituted sufficient evidence of theft per company policy. The HR rep on duty was one of his people, so no one pushed back. She paused. I wasn't surprised. I was angry, but I wasn't surprised. Why didn't you come to me, or the executive team? She looked at him with the expression of a woman who has thought a great deal about how power distributes itself inside organizations. Because I'm a warehouse worker who's been officially written up 3 times in 14 months by the supervisor in question. You're going to go to the owner of the company and say the supervisor is running a theft operation based on a folder of notes I put together on my own time? She shook her head. I needed something they couldn't ignore. And then you walked up and knocked on my door and I thought, well, that changes the math. Adrian looked at the folder in his hands and then at her. You were going to come to me. I was going to find a way, she said, with or without you walking up and knocking. She looked at him steadily. But this is faster. He was quiet for a moment. Outside the small office, the sounds of the shelter moved through the thin walls. A child's voice, briefly, someone moving furniture, the low, consistent warmth of a building that doesn't stop being inhabited when you close a door. Franklin, my forensic accountant, has already been through 24 months of the raw data, Adrian said. He has the shape of it. 800,000 to 1.2 million in losses. 7 employees with fabricated disciplinary records, 4 of them terminated. He paused. You're the most recent, not the first. Something moved across Emily's face at that. Not surprise. Something more like the specific pain of having a thing confirmed that you suspected but had hoped you were wrong about. Who else? She asked. I'll have the names by tomorrow, with everything. He closed the folder and held it out to her. Keep this. Don't give it to anyone yet. I need 3 days to get the full picture put together properly. Surveillance, financial records, witness statements from the employees he targeted. When this happens, it happens once and it happens completely. Not a warning, not a quiet departure. The whole thing, in front of the right people. She took the folder back, looked at it for a moment, and then looked at him. I want something clear between us, she said. Okay. This isn't about getting my job back. I don't need you to fix that as a way of fixing the situation. Her voice was careful and direct. The people who lost their jobs before me, people who had families, who had been there longer, who maybe didn't have savings to fall back on the way I do, they're what matters. I want them cleared. Formally, in writing, with an acknowledgement that what happened to them was wrong, not a quiet reversal, a real one. That's reasonable, Adrian said. It's not reasonable, she said. It's the minimum. He looked at her for a moment. Fair enough. She nodded once and stood up. The conversation was over on her terms, which he found he didn't mind. I'll walk you out, she said. They went back through the short hallway, past the bulletin board with its chaotic paper accumulation, and Adrian was almost at the front door when a voice came from the main room to the left. Emily. Old voice, warm and slightly roughened, with the specific cadence of someone whose accent has lived in an American city for decades without ever fully becoming American. Who's at the door? Emily glanced at Adrian. A brief private flicker of something. Consideration, or maybe anticipation, crossed her face. Someone who says he knows you, she said, and stepped back to let him pass. Margaret Okafor was sitting in a high-backed chair near the window, a blanket across her knees and a cup of something warm held in both hands the way you hold a cup when your hands are cold and you want to make the warmth last. She was smaller than she'd been 28 years ago, redistributed by time, and she moved more carefully than she had. But the face was the same. The eyes were the same. The specific quality of her attention when it turned toward the doorway and found Adrian standing in it was absolutely, completely the same. She looked at him for a long moment. The shelter moved around them. A toddler tottered through the background. Someone in the kitchen was running water. A woman Adrian's age passed through with a laundry basket without looking up. But in the circle of that doorway, everything else went quiet. I know your face, Margaret said. His voice wasn't entirely steady. You should. I used to stand outside your building and watch you through the window when I was supposed to be doing my homework. A pause. Something working through her expression that he couldn't read completely. Memory, maybe. Turning something over. "Adrian," she said. Not a question, not quite a statement. Something in between. The way you say a word when you're testing whether it still fits the thing it's supposed to describe. "Yes, ma'am." She was quiet for what felt like a long time. Then she said, "You grew up." "I did." "You grew up rich." "I did." She made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite something else. "Sit down," she said. "My neck hurts if I have to look up at people." He sat in the chair across from her. Emily had drifted to the doorway, present but not intervening, the stance of someone who understands that certain rooms need to be entered by fewer people than are in the hallway. "I should have come back sooner," Adrian said. He hadn't planned to lead with it, but there it was. Margaret looked at him. "Yes." "I don't have a reason that's good enough." "No," she said. "You probably don't." She sipped from her cup. "But you're here now, and I'm still here, so that's something." She paused, looking at him with an assessment that was not unkind but was completely honest. "How's your mother?" He shook his head slightly. Margaret closed her eyes for a moment. "When?" 6 years ago." She was a strong woman, stubborn, the good kind of stubborn. She opened her eyes again. "She used to try to give me things she didn't have, food she needed herself, little things from the house. I always gave them back." "I didn't know that." "You were 11, she said. "You weren't supposed to know everything." She looked at him steadily. "What are you doing here, Adrian? The real reason. Not the thing you told Emily, whatever that was." He looked at her. "The thing I told Emily was the real reason." "Then tell me." He told her again. The same story, but different in the telling this time. Shorter and more exposed. Because Margaret didn't require the same careful arrangement of words that strangers did. She had known him when he was frightened and had nothing, which meant the armor he'd built for public consumption was mostly redundant in her presence. She listened with the same patience Emily had shown, which was probably not a coincidence. When he finished, she said, "You carried that a long time." "Yes." "And now you're here because Emily is in trouble, and the trouble happened in your building, and you found the photograph. And one thing led to another." She tilted her head slightly. "That's not a simple reason. It's several reasons." "Yes," he said again. "I'm not pretending it's simpler than it is." She was quiet for a moment, the cup warm between her hands. "Emily is the one who keeps this place alive," Margaret said. "I'm the one who started it, and I'm the one these women come to sit with because I've been here long enough to be something permanent. But Emily is the one who does the work. The real work." She looked at the door where Emily was standing. "She gives money she shouldn't give. She gives time she should spend sleeping. She takes cardboard boxes home like they're precious." A small pause. "Because they are precious to the right people." "I know," Adrian said. "Do you know why she does it?" He looked at her. Margaret met his eyes. "Because someone did it for her once. Different story, different building, different city. But someone once decided she was worth stopping for." The older woman's gaze was very steady. "That's how it works, Adrian. Someone stops for you. And then you spend the rest of your life paying it forward, or you spend it moving away from what you were given and hoping the weight doesn't catch you." The room was quiet for a moment. "It caught me," he said. "Yes," Margaret said simply. "But you answered the door." He left the shelter at 8:47 and sat in the car in the dark for 6 minutes before he could make himself drive. Not because of grief exactly, or shame exactly, but because of something that was a compound of both, and also relief. And also the specific disorientation of a man who has just had a debt, acknowledged that he'd convinced himself he'd managed to outrun. He drove home. He went upstairs. Noah was asleep, finally, the dinosaur pajamas visible above the blanket that he'd kicked partly off. Adrian pulled the blanket back up and stood in the room for a moment in the dark. He thought about what Margaret had said. Someone stops for you, and then you spend the rest of your life paying it forward, or you spend it moving away. He'd been moving away. Building things, growing things, accumulating, all of it genuinely his, genuinely earned, not a simple story. but built on a foundation that included a woman with a Nigerian accent and a folding table who had come to a dying woman's house and decided that this particular family was worth saving. He hadn't gone back. He'd given to other causes, carefully chosen, strategically impactful, managed by people who knew what they were doing. He'd been good, on paper, to a reasonable approximation of good. But he hadn't gone back. He thought about Emily Carter taking cardboard boxes home 4 nights a week after 8-hour warehouse shifts, building makeshift cribs for women who had nothing to put their babies in. Not because she was special in some cinematic way, because someone had once decided she was worth stopping for, and she'd taken that and turned it into her answer to the question of what she was supposed to do with her life. He went to his office and opened his laptop. He typed up 3 pages of notes. What Franklin had found, what Emily's folder contained, what would need to happen in the next 72 hours to build a case that was complete enough to present publicly and legally. He wrote it out with the particular discipline of a man who, when he was motivated, moved with the systematic precision that had built a logistics company from a borrowed van and a single freight contract into something that employed 600 people and moved product across 5 states. He was motivated now. At 11:30, Marcus texted. Video was filmed by C. Morrison, forklift operator, been with company 8 months. Greer's hire. Account that posted it created 2 weeks before the post. Want me to flag it? Adrian typed back. Get me everything on Morrison. Don't flag it yet. Don't tip Greer off to anything. He thought for a moment, then added, also find out who else he's hired in the last 18 months. Every direct hire. He closed the laptop and went to bed and lay in the dark and thought about what Emily had said. It's not reasonable. It's the minimum. He'd like that. He'd like the precision of it. The refusal to accept the language of generosity when what she was asking for was justice, which was a different thing entirely and shouldn't need to be dressed up as a favor. He thought about the 4 people who had lost their jobs. Their files were in Franklin's report, briefly, names and dates and categories of the fabricated violations that had been used to end their employment. A man named Thomas Greer had worked freight for 9 years before he was terminated for a supposed inventory discrepancy. A woman named Janice Porter had been with the company for 7 years. The others were similarly tenured, similarly clean before the 14 months that Dennis Greer had apparently decided were the window in which he could operate without consequence. He lay in the dark and let himself be angry about it. Not the managed anger that he used professionally, the cold, focused version that was productive. The unmanaged kind that sits in your chest and doesn't have an outlet. He let it sit there. It was useful to remember what it felt like. The unmediated version of it. An 11-year-old boy watching his mother shrink inside herself, watching the refrigerator, doing the math of days remaining in the month, learning the specific arithmetic of being someone the world has decided is not worth slowing down for. He had escaped that arithmetic. He'd escaped it so completely that for long stretches of his adult life he'd forgotten that he'd ever had to do it. The employees Greer had targeted had not escaped it. They'd been handed it. By a man inside Adrian's company, in Adrian's warehouse, under Adrian's nominal oversight. He'd been looking the other way, not maliciously, not consciously, but he'd built a system and trusted it and stopped checking whether the system was actually honest. And someone had moved into that gap and spent 14 months at minimum making ordinary people's lives measurably worse. That was on him. He wasn't interested in absolving himself of it. He was interested in fixing it. The next 2 days moved fast and inward, the way the days before a storm move, quiet on the surface, everything underneath running at a different speed. Franklin continued his work. Marcus assembled personnel records, compiled Greer's hiring history, and turned up 3 more employees directly connected to the supervisor who appeared to have been, in varying capacities, either aware of the operation or actively complicit. C. Morrison, who'd filmed Emily, was one of them. 2 others were shift coordinators whose incident reports consistently supported Greer's version of events in situations that later didn't add up. Adrian pulled in the company's outside legal counsel, not the general retainer team, but a specific attorney named Shira Voss who specialized in corporate fraud, and who had the particular quality of being completely unsentimental without being unkind. He sat down with her on the morning of the second day and laid out everything Franklin and Marcus had assembled. Shira went through it with the methodical patience of someone who was not going to rush a process simply because the client was agitated. And when she was done, she folded her hands on the table and said, "It's solid. It's not perfect. You'll want more on Morrison and the two coordinators before this goes anywhere near a courtroom. But for the purpose of an internal action, you have more than enough." "I want more than an internal action," Adrian said. She looked at him. "I want the criminal referral. I want law enforcement involvement. I want it fully documented and formally prosecuted." He paused. "And I want the employee records corrected, all 7, with a formal written acknowledgement from the company that the disciplinary actions were fabricated. Not amended, expunged." Shira made a note. "The expungements are procedurally straightforward. The acknowledgement letter will need specific language to limit downstream liability. I can draft something that's both honest and legally defensible." "It needs to be honest first," Adrian said. Defensible second." She looked at him over the rims of her glasses for a moment. "Those two things are compatible more often than you'd think." "Make sure they're compatible this time," he said. She made another note and moved on. He called Emily on the evening of the second day. She picked up on the third ring, and he could hear the shelter in the background. Voices, the low domestic sounds of communal living, before she said, "Hold on," and the sounds receded as she moved somewhere quieter. "Where are we?" she asked. He walked her through it. The forensic findings, the legal strategy, the timeline. He was specific because he'd learned in the first conversation that Emily Carter did not want to be managed or summarized. She wanted the actual information, and she'd do her own processing with it. She listened without interrupting. When he was done, she said, "The 4 who lost their jobs. What's the process for reaching them?" "My team is working on contact information. We'll reach out this week." "I want to be part of that." He hadn't expected that, though he should have. "Why?" "Because I know what it feels like to get a call from a company you no longer work for that wants something from you," she said. "It feels like being used twice. If someone calls them, it should be someone who isn't calling because it's professionally useful to make this right. It should be someone who actually cares that it was wrong." A beat of silence. "All right," he said. "I'm not asking your permission," she said. "I know. I'm agreeing." Another brief pause, smaller than the first. "Okay," she said. "There's something else," Adrian said. He hadn't planned to bring this up now, but the hour was late and he was tired, and sometimes the unplanned version of a thing was the honest version. "The shelter, Margaret's building. What about it?" "The roof has needed work for 3 years, according to the city permit records. The electrical panel is original to the 1980s. The hot water system is—" "I know what it needs," Emily said, and something in her voice was careful. Don't what?" "Don't walk in with a checkbook as the first move. That's not what this is." She paused. "If you want to help this place, come in and ask Miss Margaret what she needs. Talk to the residents. Understand what you're actually doing before you decide what it is." He was quiet for a moment. "Fair," he said. "It's not about fair," she said. "It's about not turning a shelter into a project." He heard it. The distinction mattered. He made a note of it in a part of his brain that was paying attention to how Emily Carter thought, which was a part that had been quietly active since the break room. "I'll do it right," he said. "I'll believe that when I see it," she said, and there was just enough lightness in it to make it something other than a challenge. Not quite warmth, but not cold either. She hung up, and he sat with the phone in his hand for a moment in the quiet of his office. On the third morning, Marcus put a thumb drive on his desk without saying anything. Adrian looked at it. "Additional surveillance footage," Marcus said. "The company's cameras have an off-site backup server. Greer had access to the primary surveillance system. He's deleted or overwritten footage on the main server 14 times in the last 18 months, always within 48 hours of a significant inventory event." He pointed at the thumb drive. "But the off-site backup doesn't have a delete function. It just accumulates." Adrian picked up the thumb drive. "How bad is it?" he asked. Marcus, who was not a person who used words like bad loosely, considered for a moment. "It's clear," he said finally, "on multiple dates, in good lighting." Adrian put the drive in his laptop and looked at 7 minutes of footage spread across 6 different incidents. He watched it once, without sound, and then closed the laptop. Get this to Shira, he said. Already sent. And set up the executive meeting. He looked at the wall above his desk, which had a large city map that he'd pinned there when he'd first taken over this office and hadn't moved in 4 years. Detroit spread out across it in all its complexity. The distance between the East Side warehouse and the Brightmoor neighborhood just a few inches on paper, closer than he'd understood. Thursday. Full board presence, company leadership, HR. Do you want legal on site? Yes. Do you want me to tell Greer what it's about? Adrian thought about the 4 people who had been handed fabricated disciplinary records and walked out the door of a company they'd served for years, with nothing but a humiliation they probably still woke up thinking about. Tell him it's a quarterly review, he said. Tell him his numbers look great. Marcus wrote it down without expression. One more thing, Adrian said. He was looking at the map. The woman who founded the Helping Hands shelter, Margaret Okafor. He turned away from the wall. She knew my mother. She knew me when I was a kid, and I let 28 years go by without going back. He paused. I want to do something real, not a donation, something real. I want to understand what the shelter actually needs from the ground up and build a plan from there. And I don't want to do it in a way that makes it about me. Marcus looked at him. In 6 years of working together, Marcus had seen Adrian in a range of professional situations and had learned to read the difference between the versions of his employer fairly well. He said carefully, "What does that look like practically?" "I don't know yet," Adrian said. "That's the point." He looked back at the map. The warehouse was a small rectangle on the east side. Brightmoor was an irregular shape to the west. Between them was an entire city. 300,000 people, several decades, a promise made by a child on a doorstep and left there like something he'd forgotten to pick up. Outside the window, Detroit was doing what Detroit does in October, enduring roughly, with the particular character of a city that has been written off enough times to have developed a specific immunity to it. He had a meeting to prepare for. He had people to call and evidence to assemble and a presentation to build that would need to be precise enough to be unchallengeable and clear enough that no one in that room would be able to look away from what it was showing them. But first, he picked up his phone and called Noah's school to ask if he could come in at noon and have lunch with his son. The woman at the front desk said yes. She said Noah would be delighted. She was right. The calls to the 4 former employees went out on Wednesday morning, 2 days before the executive meeting. Emily made them herself, from the small back office in the shelter with the broken filing cabinet drawer and the overhead light that flickered slightly when the heat kicked on. Adrian had offered to have his team reach out first. To smooth the path, he'd said, frame the conversation professionally. She'd said no. She'd said it the same way she said most things that mattered to her, without apology and without elaboration, and he'd backed off the way he was slowly learning to back off when Emily Carter drew a line. She had a list of 4 names and 4 phone numbers that Marcus had assembled, and she had no script. She didn't want a script. A script was the kind of thing you used when you were managing a situation. She wasn't managing anything. She was calling people who had been hurt inside a building she knew, by a man she knew, in a system she understood from the inside, and she was calling them as someone who was also inside that system and had also been hurt by it. That was the only currency she had to offer, and she'd decided it was the right currency. The first call was to Thomas Greer, no relation to Dennis, just the specific cruelty of coincidence, who had worked freight for 9 years before his termination 8 months ago. He picked up on the 4th ring, and when Emily explained who she was and why she was calling, there was a silence long enough that she almost asked if he was still there. Then he said, "I've been waiting for something like this call for 8 months. I almost stopped waiting." She talked to him for 37 minutes. The second call, to Janice Porter, went to voicemail twice. On the 3rd attempt, Janice picked up with the clipped tone of a woman who had learned to be cautious of unknown numbers and had good reasons for it. Emily introduced herself, and Janice said nothing for a moment, and then said, "Are you the one from the video? The cardboard box thing?" "Yes," Emily said. "I saw that," Janice said. "I saw it, and I thought, there it is, same thing they did to me." A pause. "Different box, same thing." The third call was to a man named Ray DeLuca, who had been with the company for 6 years, and whose termination letter had cited inventory mismanagement in language that Emily now recognized, with the specific dull fury of pattern recognition as virtually identical to the language used in her own warnings. Ray was working a construction job in Wayne County now, something he'd picked up after 3 months of nothing, and when Emily told him that the company was preparing a formal process to clear his record, he laughed, a short, compressed sound that contained approximately zero humor. "Clear my record," he said. "That's what they're calling it." "That's the starting point," Emily said. "Not the end of it." "What's the end of it?" "I don't know yet, but I'm not stopping at paperwork." Another pause. "Who are you exactly?" "Someone who had the same thing done to them 2 weeks ago and decided not to let it stay that way." A longer pause. "All right," Ray said. "What do you need from me?" The fourth call was the hardest. The fourth name on Marcus's list was a woman named Dina Croft, 26 years old, who had been with the company for 3 years and was the most recently terminated before Emily, let go 4 months ago after a disciplinary process that Franklin's record showed had been built entirely on falsified incident reports. Dina picked up immediately, and before Emily could finish introducing herself, Dina said, "I know who you are. I've been following what happened to you online." A beat. "Is it true? Is it actually going to be fixed?" Emily closed her eyes for a second. She thought about what it meant to be 26 and to have had your professional record destroyed by a man who saw you as a convenient cover story and to spend 4 months not knowing if anyone would ever care enough to fix it. "I'm working on making sure it's fixed," Emily said. "I can't promise you a specific outcome because I don't control the outcome. But I can tell you that the person who does control the outcome is prepared to do this right, and I'm going to hold him to that." "The owner," Dina said. "Yes." Another pause. "Why is he doing it? Really?" Emily thought about a man sitting in the small chair across from Margaret, his voice not quite steady, saying, "I should have come back sooner." Thought about a kid who'd been saved by someone who asked nothing in return, and what that kind of debt does to a person over 28 years if they don't address it. "Because he owes someone something," Emily said, "and he's finally figured out that this is part of how he pays it." Dina was quiet for a moment. "That's a weird reason." "Most real reasons are weird," Emily said. She reported back to Adrian that evening. Beta called him, stood in the shelter's back hallway because the office was occupied, and gave him a compact summary of all 4 conversations. He listened without interrupting, which she'd noticed was something he was capable of doing when he wanted to, though she suspected it didn't always come naturally to a man who had spent 11 years making decisions at speed. When she finished, he said, "Thomas Greer, the freight worker. He mentioned documentation, something he kept." "He kept his own records," Emily said. "Similar to what I did. He said he stopped because it felt pointless after a while." She paused. "He didn't stop entirely." A moment of silence on Adrian's end. She could hear him thinking. "Get me whatever he has," Adrian said. "Anything, even if it's incomplete." "I already asked. He's emailing it to Marcus tonight." A brief pause. "You already asked?" "Yes." "You did that before calling me." "You were going to ask for it," Emily said. "I got ahead of it." He was quiet for a moment and then said something she hadn't expected. "I'm glad you're in this." She wasn't sure what to do with that, so she said, "Thursday is 2 days away. Tell me what you need from me for the meeting." He told her. She wrote it down. They hung up, and she stood in the hallway for a moment with her hand still on the phone, feeling the weight of Thursday gathering in the distance. Bus. The morning of the executive meeting, Dennis Greer arrived at the Ashcroft Logistics main office at 9:45, 15 minutes early, wearing a tie that he'd clearly dug out specifically for the occasion. He was in a good mood. One of the administrative assistants noticed it, told Marcus later that Greer had made a joke in the elevator about the quarterly numbers, had clapped a facilities guy on the shoulder going down the corridor, had come into the 4th-floor conference room with the settled ease of a man who believed the day was going to confirm something he already knew about himself. He didn't notice at first that the room was fuller than a standard quarterly review warranted. Shira Voss was there, in a gray suit, with 2 members of her team, and a laptop that was open but angled away from the door. Franklin sat to her left with a binder that was 2 inches thick and had color-coded tabs. The head of HR, a woman named Carol, who had been with the company for 12 years, and who Marcus privately considered one of the most competent people in the building, sat near the far end of the table with an expression that gave nothing away. Two board members Adrian had called personally were present. A man from the company's outside insurance carrier sat near the window, which was not a typical quarterly review attendee, and Greer's eyes skipped across him without registering the significance. Adrian was at the head of the table, which was the first thing that should have told Greer something. He didn't attend quarterly reviews as a rule. He had people for that. Greer sat down in the chair indicated across from Franklin and looked around the room once more with the expression of a man recalibrating slightly, but still fundamentally confident in his read of the situation. "Big turnout," he said. Not nervously. "More the way you comment on weather." Adrian looked at him. "We're going to be talking about something more specific than the quarterly numbers, Dennis. I want you to know that up front." Greer's expression didn't collapse, which said something about him. It adjusted, a small tightening around the eyes, a slight repositioning of the shoulders. He looked around the room once more, and this time his gaze spent a moment longer on Shiravos, who looked back at him with the complete professional blankness of a woman who had been in this specific room, metaphorically speaking, many times before. "All right," Greer said. His voice was steady. "What are we talking about?" Adrian nodded to Franklin. Franklin opened the binder to the first tab and set a single page in front of Greer. "We're going to start with October 14th, 18 months ago," he said, in the measured, uninfluenced tone he used for everything. "Freight manifest discrepancy, Dock C, night shift. You filed the incident report." He set a second page beside the first. "This is the backup surveillance footage from the off-site server for that date." Greer looked at the pages. He didn't pick them up. "We have footage from the off-site backup server," Franklin continued, "for 14 separate incidents across the last 22 months in which significant inventory losses occurred during or immediately following shifts you supervised. In 11 of those 14 incidents, there are individuals, some of whom are employees of this company, some of whom are not, visible in the footage performing actions inconsistent with authorized operations." A silence settled into the room. "You deleted the primary surveillance footage for 12 of those 14 dates," Franklin said. "The off-site system doesn't have a delete function." Greer's jaw moved, but nothing came out. "In the same period," Franklin went on, 7 employees under your supervisory authority received formal disciplinary actions for inventory-related violations. Cross-referencing those disciplinary dates with the incident dates, he turned to the next tab, shows that in every case, the disciplinary action was filed within 14 days of a significant inventory loss. In every case, the inventory loss predated the disciplinary action. He closed the binder and folded his hands on top of it. "The losses total approximately $1.1 million, he said. "Give or take, pending the completion of the full audit." The room was very quiet. Greer had stopped looking at the pages. He was looking at the table surface in front of him, and whatever calculations were running behind his eyes. They weren't producing anything visible yet. He had the look of a man standing at the top of a very long staircase, understanding for the first time that the staircase goes all the way down. "I want a lawyer," he said. "You're entitled to one," Shira said. "This meeting is not a legal proceeding. You're free to leave at any time." She paused. "The materials in front of you represent what the company has compiled to date. They will be referred to law enforcement this afternoon regardless of what happens in this room." Greer looked up at that. For the first time, there was something in his face that wasn't controlled. "This afternoon," he said. "Yes," Shira said. He looked at Adrian. It was a long look, and it was not a simple one. There was anger in it, and also something that was almost calculation even now. The look of a man checking whether there was still a play available, some argument or lever or angle that might shift the room. Adrian looked back at him without expression. There was no play. "You want to know the funny thing?" Greer said. His voice had changed, still steady, but differently steady now. The steadiness of someone who has decided that the situation is lost and is choosing how to carry himself through what comes next. "I filed every one of those reports exactly the way this company's system allowed me to. Everything was documented, everything was processed, and for 18 months, nobody looked. That's true, Adrian said, and that's also on me. I'm not here to pretend otherwise. Greer stared at him. So what? You fix the paperwork, throw me to the police, and the company emerges with clean hands? The company doesn't have clean hands, Adrian said. I let this happen by not looking. The system let it happen by being look-awayable. We're going to deal with that publicly through the reforms we're announcing this week. He paused. But none of that changes what you did to those 7 people. You specifically targeted them. You filed against them to cover your own actions. You took their livelihoods and their records and their dignity, and you did it deliberately. His voice stayed level. So yes, law enforcement, this afternoon. Greer was quiet for a moment. Then he pushed back from the table and stood up. I want my lawyer, he said. There's a room down the hall, Carol said quietly. Take the time you need. He walked out, and one of Shira's associates followed him at a professional distance, and the door clicked shut. The room breathed out. Adrian looked at the empty chair across from Franklin. He felt something that he thought might be relief, but turned out, on examination, to be something more complicated. The specific weight of a thing that has been wrong for a long time and has now been named correctly, which is not the same as it being fixed, but is a necessary precondition for fixing. The referral goes to the DA's office at 2 o'clock, Shira said. And the expungements? He asked. Carol opened a folder. Letters are drafted for all 7 employees, including Emily Carter. Formal acknowledgement, specific language about the fabrication, the corrected records. She looked at him. I want to say, for what it's worth, that the file on Ms. Carter should never have been processed the way it was. The video should have triggered a review, not an immediate termination. That's a failure of our process, and I take responsibility for my part in it. He nodded. I know. That's part of the reform. She nodded back, and he had the sense that she meant it, which mattered. He wasn't interested in people performing accountability. He needed the real version from the people who ran his company's day-to-day, or the reforms were decorative. 2 more things before we close, he said. He looked at the board members at the end of the table. First, every former employee we're clearing is being offered the opportunity to return to their position at their previous seniority level, with back pay calculated from the date of their wrongful termination. That's not optional. That's the offer, made clearly and without pressure. One of the board members, a man named Rice, who had strong opinions about legal liability and tended to express them before anything else, started to say something. Adrian held up a hand. I've talked to Shira. It's manageable. And it's right. Rice subsided. Second, Adrian said. He paused, and what he said next was not something he'd put in the pre-meeting briefing documents. We're establishing an independent worker advocacy function inside the company. Separate from HR, separate from the supervisory chain, reporting directly to the board. Any employee can bring a concern there without going through their direct management. It'll take 3 months to build properly. I want it built properly. He looked around the table. Dennis Greer operated in the gaps of this company's oversight for at least 18 months. Those gaps are closing. The room was quiet. Then Carol said simply, Good. Out. Emily heard about this meeting from Adrian at 4 o'clock that afternoon, standing in the parking lot of the shelter because she'd been in the middle of moving donated furniture and had stepped outside when her phone rang. She listened. She asked 2 questions. She said, The back pay. Is that firm? It's firm. Even if some of them don't want to come back? The back pay is separate from the return offer, he said. They get the money regardless of what they decide about the job. She exhaled slowly. Okay. Greer is at the DA's office. He went with his lawyer at 2, the same as Shira said. It'll take time to go through the system, but the referral is in. Okay, she said again. He waited for a moment and then said, You could say something more than okay. She looked at the parking lot, cracked asphalt, a rusted fence along one edge, a dumpster that the shelter shared with the building next door, the specific, unglamorous infrastructure of a place that operates on not enough money and makes it work anyway. I'm glad it happened, she said. I'm glad you went through with it the way you did. She paused. I'm thinking about Thomas and Janice and Ray and Dina, about what they're going to feel when they get the letters. Whether the letters will be enough. They won't be enough, Adrian said. Letters aren't ever enough for something like this. But they're the starting point. Yeah, she said. I know. She watched a car pull into the lot. A woman getting out with two small children, a bag over each shoulder, the specific coordinated efficiency of a mother moving several things at once. The girl who answered the door was already coming out to help without being asked. There's one more thing I want. Tell me. The video, she said. The one that framed me. It's still up. It's been shared 400 times. My name is attached to it. She kept her voice even. I want a public correction, not a quiet takedown. A public statement from the company, with my name, saying explicitly that the video was fabricated as part of a deliberate scheme to cover up theft, and that I was wrongfully terminated, and that my record is completely clear. A brief pause on his end. That's more exposure than the legal team is going to love, he said. I know. It opens up commentary and response from Greer's side. I know, she said again. I'm asking anyway. Another pause, longer. I'll talk to Shira tonight, he said. I think we can do it. I'm not asking if you think you can do it, she said. I'm asking if you will. The specific quality of the silence that followed told her he understood the difference. Yes, he said. I will. She watched the woman with the two children disappear inside the shelter door, held open now by the girl in the oversized sweatshirt. Somewhere inside, Margaret was probably in her chair by the window, with her cup of something warm, watching the door the way she always watched the door. Adrian, she said. Yeah. Thank you for not making me fight you for every piece of this. A moment passed. You would have, though, he said. Yes, she said. I would have. She hung up and went back inside. The public statement went out the next morning, on the company's official channels and through a press release that Shira's team drafted and Adrian personally revised twice before approving. It was clear and specific and did not use the softened, liability-cushioned language that Rice had advocated for in the conference call the previous evening. It named Emily Carter. It named the fabricated video. It described, without ambiguity, what the company had uncovered and what it meant for her employment record and her reputation. By noon, the post had been shared more times than the original video. By 2 o'clock, 3 local news outlets had picked it up. By 4, Emily had 43 messages in her phone from numbers she didn't recognize, which she looked at once and put down because she was in the middle of helping a woman named Constance figure out how to apply for emergency housing assistance, and Constance's situation was immediate and real, and 43 messages from strangers could wait. The girl in the oversized sweatshirt, her name was Kira, she was 13, she'd been at the shelter for 2 months with her mother, stuck her head around the doorframe and said, "There's a news van outside." Emily didn't look up from the form she was helping Constance navigate. "Tell them we're not available today. They want to talk to you." "I know what they want. Tell them not today." Kira disappeared. Emily heard faintly the front door open and close, and then Kira's voice carrying through it with the unselfconscious authority of a 13-year-old delivering a verdict. Constance, who had been watching Emily with the sideways attention of someone deciding whether to trust the room, said quietly, "You're the one from the thing." "Yes." "The box thing." "Yes?" Constance looked down at the form, then back up. "That man at the company, he really got arrested?" "He's being processed. It takes time." "Good," Constance said. Just that. Simple and unadorned, the word landing with the specific weight of someone who knows from personal experience what it costs to be on the wrong end of a system that doesn't look at you. They went back to the form. Adrian came to the shelter on Saturday. He didn't call ahead this time. He knocked, and Kira answered, and looked at him with the flat recognition of someone who has now cataloged him as a recurring presence and has decided he's probably acceptable. "She's in the back," Kira said. "Miss Margaret is in her chair." "I'll start with Miss Margaret," he said. He found her where he'd found her the first night. The chair by the window, the blanket, the cup. There was a child of about 4 sitting on the floor near her feet, playing with a set of plastic animals in the concentrated silence of very young children at play. And Margaret was watching the child with the particular quality of attention she gave to things she found worth watching. She looked up when Adrian came in. "You made the news," she said. "I know." "Sit down." She waited until he did. "How do you feel?" He considered the question. "Like I did something that should have been done earlier," he said. "And?" "And like doing it earlier would have been better." "Yes," she said. "But you did it now." She watched the child rearrange the plastic animals into a configuration that seemed to satisfy something. "Emily told me about the back pay. The letters. They went out yesterday." "Thomas called me," she said. "He's worked with us off and on over the years when he could manage the time. After he lost his job, he couldn't manage it anymore." She looked up from the child. "He cried on the phone. He's a grown man in his 40s who worked freight for 9 years, and he cried because someone told him it wasn't his fault." Adrian was quiet. "You understand what that means," Margaret said. "Not the money, not the record. The part where someone told him formally, in writing, with their name on it, that it wasn't his fault." She looked at him steadily. "That's what people carry, the weight of being blamed for something they didn't do. It doesn't matter how much time passes. You carry it until someone with authority over the situation tells you it wasn't true." "I understand," he said. "I don't think you fully understand yet," she said, not unkindly. "But you're doing the right thing, so understanding will catch up." The child on the floor said something to the plastic giraffe in the private language of 4-year-olds. Neither of the adults could make it out, but the giraffe seemed to take it in stride. "I want to talk to you about the shelter," Adrian said, "but I want to do it the right way." "What's the right way?" "Tell me what you need," he said. "Not what I assume you need. Tell me what you actually need, and tell me what would make things worse even if it looked like help, and I'll listen before I say anything." Margaret looked at him for a long time, long enough that he wondered if he'd phrased it wrong. Then she said, "When you were a boy, do you know what I noticed about you?" "No." "You listened," she said. 11 years old, frightened out of your mind, and you listened. Most people, adults even, they stop listening when they're scared. They talk because silence feels dangerous. But you listened." She paused. "I always thought that was going to be the thing that saved you, whichever way life went." He didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything. "The roof," she said. "The roof is the first thing. After that, the electrical panel, because the city inspector last year said we have 2 years at best before it becomes a code issue." She shifted in her chair. "But before we talk about any of that, before a single contractor comes through that door, I need you to sit in this room on a weeknight when it's full and just watch what happens here. Watch how it works. Watch the women who come in at 9 o'clock with nothing, and watch how the other women who've been here 3 weeks already know how to help them because they just came through the same door." She looked at him. "If you do that first, then we can talk about the roof." "Next Wednesday," Adrian said. "I'll be here at 6. "Bring your son." He blinked. "He's 7. "I know how old he is. Bring him anyway." She picked up her cup. "Children learn things in rooms like this that they can't learn anywhere else, and from what Emily tells me, he's a child who pays attention." He thought about Noah in the car, saying you should fix that about a debt owed to someone Noah hadn't met, with the matter-of-fact moral clarity of a person who hasn't yet learned to make things complicated. He thought about the dinosaur pajamas and the book about the door in the mountain that only one boy could see. "I'll bring him," Adrian said. Done. On the following Monday, Emily came back to the warehouse. Not as an employee. As herself. Adrian had called her the Friday before and asked if she'd be willing to walk through the facility with him and the new head of operations he was bringing in. Someone from outside who didn't have the accumulated blind spots of the existing management chain. Emily had said she'd think about it. She'd called back 2 hours later and said yes. She wore the same dark work trousers as always. She didn't perform anything. She walked through the loading bays and the break room and the freight prep area with the specific practical knowledge of someone who had spent 6 years learning a place from the inside. And she pointed out things that the new operations lead. A woman named Sandra, mid-50s, with the dry efficiency of someone who had managed large facilities before and was not here to be impressed, made notes about with the speed of someone whose note-taking was always the genuine article. They came back around to the break room, and Emily stood for a moment in the doorway of the space where 2 weeks ago she'd stood with a box in her hands and 40 people watching and a man who believed he had finally broken her. Adrian watched her from a few feet back. He watched the way she looked at the folding tables and the vending machines and the lockers, and the thing he saw in her face wasn't trauma exactly. It was closer to inventory. Taking stock of a place that had been the site of something and deciding what relationship to have with it going forward. Sandra said something about the sightlines from the supervisor's station, making a note. Emily turned away from the break room and looked at Adrian. "The workers here," she said. "The ones who are still here. They need someone to talk to. Not HR in the formal sense. The formal sense is part of what failed them. They need a person with an actual name who they can go to and know something will happen." "That's what the advocacy function is for," Adrian said. "I know what it's for," she said. "I'm saying the person matters as much as the function. Whoever you put in that role, it can't be someone the workers already associate with management. It has to be someone they believe is actually on their side." Sandra looked up from her notes. "She's right." Adrian looked between them. Two women who had been in entirely different rooms until this situation put them in the same building, and who were now clearly going to be a useful and slightly unnerving combination. "Do you have someone in mind?" he asked Emily. She thought for a moment. "Thomas Greer, the freight worker. He's been offered his job back." "He has. He has 9 years in this building. People respect him. And he has personal experience of what it feels like to go to the system and have the system not work." She paused. "If he wants it, don't pressure him, but ask." Adrian made a note. They finished the walkthrough. Sandra had 2 pages of observations and said she'd have a full report by end of week. Emily was collecting her jacket from where she'd set it on a railing when Adrian said, "Emily." She turned. He wasn't entirely sure how to say the next thing, which was unusual for him. He was generally comfortable with direct speech, but this was not a professional thing he was about to say, and he was still learning at 32 to be comfortable with the difference. "What you did with those calls," he said. "Thomas, Janice, Ray, Dina, what you said to them. I wasn't there, but I heard back from each of them, in different ways, and—" He stopped, recalibrated. "You gave them something the letter couldn't give them, before the letter arrived." He paused. "I just wanted to say that." Emily looked at him for a moment. "I know what it is to get a call from someone who went through what you went through and came out on the other side of it," she said. "It doesn't fix anything by itself, but it means you're not alone in the middle of it." She picked up her jacket. "That's not a special skill. That's just paying attention." She walked out of the warehouse, and the afternoon light from the loading dock door fell across the break room floor for a moment before the door swung shut behind her. Sandra looked at Adrian. "She's something," she said, the kind of flat professional observation that Sandra apparently delivered about most things she found remarkable. "Yes," Adrian said, "she is." He stood in the break room for a moment longer in the space where it had started. The empty box, the 40 people, the man who thought he'd finally won something, and the woman who'd taken the box from his hands with the calm of someone who had already decided it wasn't going to end the way he planned. Then he pulled out his phone and called Noah's school again. "Parent pickup today," he told them. He'd be there himself. He was there by 3:15, standing at the pickup line with the other parents, his hands in his jacket pockets, watching the door. When Noah came out and saw him, the kid's face did the specific thing that 7-year-old faces do when they get something they weren't expecting but had been hoping for. A brightness that they try briefly to contain because they're 7 and starting to understand coolness as a concept, and then it wins over the containment effort entirely. "You're early," Noah said. "I know." "Are we doing something?" "We are," Adrian said. "Get in the car. I'll tell you on the way." Noah got in the car with the efficient readiness of a child prepared to be interested in whatever came next. He buckled his seatbelt, put his bag on the floor, and looked at his father with the open-faced attention that Adrian knew, understood bone deep, in the way that only a man who spent 7 years watching someone grow can understand, he had to be worthy of. Wednesday night, Adrian said, pulling out of the school parking lot. We're going somewhere together. There's someone I want you to meet. Who? A woman named Margaret. She knew your grandmother when your grandmother was sick. He kept his eyes on the road. She helped our family when we needed it. I should have introduced you a long time ago. Noah absorbed this. He had the particular processing quiet of a child turning something over carefully. Why didn't you? He asked. Adrian drove for a moment. Outside, Detroit moved past in the October afternoon, ordinary and complicated and entirely itself, the way the city always was. Because I was doing it wrong, he said. I'm trying to do it right now. Noah considered this with the gravity it deserved. Okay, he said. Then, is she nice? Yes, Adrian said. She's very nice, and she doesn't miss much. Like you? Adrian glanced over. She's better at it than I am. Noah seemed to find this acceptable. He looked out the window for a while. Then, in the offhand way that children deliver the things that hit hardest, Dad, I think you're doing better. Adrian kept his eyes on the road. Yeah? He said. Yeah, Noah said. You seem less like you're thinking about the old stuff. He drove. The city moved. Somewhere on the west side, a shelter was doing what it did every evening, opening its doors, setting out food, making space for people who needed space to exist while they figured out how to get back to themselves. He wasn't going to fix everything. He knew that. The system that had let Greer operate for 18 months was a symptom of things that didn't get fixed in a single Thursday meeting or a press release or a round of letters, however carefully worded. The reforms he was putting in place would help, if he held to them, which he intended to do. But he was not under the illusion that intention was the same as outcome. What he knew was this. He'd answered the door. He was still answering it, and the boy in the passenger seat was watching him, and that meant something. I'm working on it, Adrian said. Noah nodded like that was a reasonable answer and turned back to the window and let the city be the city around them. Wednesday came with the specific gray of a Detroit November, trying to decide whether to commit to winter. The sky had that low, pressed-down quality that sits over the city from October through March, and the wind coming off the river had sharpened enough overnight that it meant something now. Adrian picked Noah up from school at 5:30, which was 40 minutes earlier than the usual pickup, and Noah came out of the building with his jacket half-zipped and his backpack hanging off one shoulder, the way he always wore it, despite Adrian having mentioned the ergonomics of it approximately 11 times. You look nervous, Noah said, getting in the car. I'm not nervous. You've got your other face, Noah said. What other face? The one that's trying not to have a face. Noah zipped his jacket with the particular focus of a child completing a task they've remembered belatedly. You had it when I had the thing at school last spring, the science fair. I wasn't nervous about the science fair. You kept checking your phone. Adrian pulled out of the school parking lot. I'm not nervous tonight, he said. I'm preparing. For what? For it to matter, Adrian said. He hadn't planned to say that, but Noah had a way of pulling answers out that bypassed the usual editorial process. Noah thought about this for a moment. Is this about the woman we're going to meet? Partly. And partly about you. Yes, Adrian said. Partly about me. Noah seemed satisfied with that. He looked out the window at Detroit going by in the early dark, his breath briefly fogging the glass, and then said, Dad, when people help you when you're little, do you have to help them back when you're big? Adrian was quiet for a moment. You don't have to, he said finally. But if you're paying attention, you want to. Because it's the right thing? Because it's what connects things, Adrian said. He wasn't entirely sure he was explaining it correctly, but he was trying. Someone stops for you, and you stop for someone else, and that's how the whole thing holds together. He paused. If nobody stops, it just falls apart. Noah pressed his palm against the window for a moment, a habit he'd had since he was 3, leaving handprints on glass without quite knowing why. I would stop, Noah said. I know you would, Adrian said. They drove the rest of the way to Brightmoor in a comfortable quiet. The shelter on a Wednesday evening in November was a different thing than it was at 9 o'clock when Emily arrived with a cardboard box and the day's last shift of energy. It was full in a way that changed the air inside. Maybe 20 women and a range of children from infants to teenagers, the particular layered sound of a communal space in active use. Someone was cooking something in the back kitchen that smelled like onions and warmth. Two women sat at a folding table near the window doing something that looked like helping each other fill out forms, their heads together over the paperwork. Three children ran through the main room with the coordinated intensity of children who have identified the precise boundaries of allowable indoor running speed. Kira intercepted Noah within approximately 45 seconds of their arrival. She'd been standing near the door in her oversized sweatshirt, and she looked at Noah with the assessing gaze of a 13-year-old, deciding what a 7-year-old was worth her time, and something in the assessment apparently came back acceptable, because she said, "You want to see the cardboard things?" Noah looked at his father for approximately 1 second of permission, got it, and was gone. Emily appeared from the hallway. She was wearing a flannel shirt over a dark t-shirt and carrying a folder, which seemed to be her resting state. She looked at the doorway where Noah had just disappeared with Kira. "He'll be okay," she said. "Kira's responsible when she wants to be." "What are the cardboard things?" Adrian asked. "Come on," she said. "I'll show you on the way to Margaret." She led him through the main room. He noticed her moving through it the way people move through spaces they know at a cellular level, slight adjustments for the shape of conversations, a hand briefly on the shoulder of a woman who looked up and then back down at her forms, a nod to someone in the kitchen doorway, and through a narrower hall to a back room that had been fitted out as a kind of workshop. It was a small room, and it was occupied by organized chaos. Cardboard in several states of construction lined the walls and covered a work table. Flat pieces, folded pieces, pieces that had been cut and scored and shaped into things that were recognizably structural. On a shelf along one wall sat 4 completed objects. Low, rectangular, reinforced at the corners with layered cardboard and lined inside with folded fabric. They were cribs. Rough ones, not beautiful, but solid and functional, with a logic to the construction that was clearly the product of iteration and problem-solving over time. Next to them were 2 low stools made by the same method, and something that was working toward being a small shelf unit. Adrian stood in the doorway and looked at it. "How long has this been going?" he asked. "About 18 months, Emily said. "It started because a woman came in with a 4-week-old and nothing to put him in, and the shelter didn't have a crib available, and I thought, I have cardboard. I have time. I can figure this out." She set her folder on the edge of the work table. "The first one was terrible. It would have held for maybe 3 days. I rebuilt it 6 times before I got the weight distribution right." She picked up one of the completed cribs slightly to demonstrate its solidity. "Now it'll hold a 30-pound child without moving." He looked at the line of them on the shelf. Then he looked at the work table, where a half-built piece was mid-construction, and at the neat organization of materials around it, the specific tidiness of a person who works in a small space and has learned to make every inch count. "You engineered these," he said. She put the crib back. "I figured them out," she said. I don't know if that counts as engineering." "It counts," he said. She looked at him for a moment with the expression she sometimes got. Not suspicious exactly, but evaluating, checking whether what he said was the performed version or the real one. Whatever she found, she seemed to decide it was acceptable, because she picked up her folder again and moved toward the door. "Margaret's in her chair," she said. "She's been asking about you all day, which she would deny if you mentioned it." Margaret was indeed in her chair. She was also in the middle of a conversation with a woman Adrian hadn't seen before, early 30s, sitting cross-legged on the floor near Margaret's feet in the specific posture of someone who has found the person in the room they most want to talk to and has arranged themselves accordingly. The woman looked up when Adrian came in, and Margaret looked up, and Margaret said to the woman without ceremony, "Give us a minute, sweetheart." The woman unfolded herself and left, touching Margaret's hand briefly as she passed. Noah was already in the room, sitting on the floor near the window with Kira, who was showing him something she'd built. A small animal shape made from folded cardboard, some kind of bird. Noah was examining it with the concentrated attention he gave to things he found genuinely interesting, turning it in his hands. Margaret watched Noah for a moment. He has good hands, she said, the way he handles that, careful without being nervous. That's not common in 7-year-olds. Adrian sat in the chair across from her. He's a good kid. He looks like his mother, Margaret said. Adrian went still for a second. You knew her? No, but Emily showed me a photograph, the eyes. She looked at Adrian steadily. I'm sorry, about Patricia and about your wife. 2 losses like that in one life is too much. He took that the way it was meant. Thank you. How are you doing with it? She asked. Not how are you, the social version. A specific question about a specific thing. Better than I was, he said. Noah helps. He paused. Working helps. Having something that matters helps. All right, she said, in the tone of someone who has accepted an answer as truthful, if not complete. She shifted in her chair and looked at him directly. Tell me about the legal situation. Emily gives me the framework, but she leaves out the parts she thinks will worry me. He told her about the DA's office, where the case was in its process. The referral had been received. The preliminary review was underway. The timeline for charges being filed was estimated at 6 to 8 weeks. He told her about Greer's lawyer, who had made an initial contact suggesting cooperation in exchange for consideration, which Shira had received without enthusiasm, but which the DA's office would evaluate on their own terms. Margaret listened with her hands around her cup. He'll try to make a deal, she said. Men like that always do. Probably, Adrian said. That's for the DA to decide. And the workers? Thomas Greer accepted the offer to return, with back pay. He started last Monday. Ray DeLuca is considering it. He's got a construction job now that he doesn't want to leave unless he's sure. Janice Porter accepted the back pay but declined to return, which is her right, and the offer wasn't conditional. He paused. Dina Croft is the one I've been thinking about most. She's 26, 3 years in the warehouse before Greer decided she was useful cover. She took the back pay and she's going back to school. She'd been taking classes before, was almost done with the logistics management certificate, and the termination knocked her off track. She's re-enrolled. Margaret looked at him. The back pay covers her tuition, he said. You made sure of that, Margaret said. It wasn't a question. The back pay is what it is, he said carefully. What she does with it is her choice. But you calculated it knowing what it would cover. He met her eyes. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. You're not a simple man, she said. You never were, even at 11. You were thinking about 12 things at once, and you'd only tell you about 2 of them. A pause. That's not a criticism. I know, he said. Emily's the opposite, Margaret said. She tells you exactly what she's thinking, and the only thing she keeps back is what she's feeling. Those 2 kinds of people, she tilted her head slightly. They're hard on each other, but they're useful to each other if they're patient. Adrian looked across the room, where Noah was now attempting to replicate the origami bird with a piece of paper Kira had produced from somewhere, his tongue between his teeth in concentration. Kira was watching with the barely restrained patience of a teacher who sees a student about to make the obvious mistake, but is letting it happen because the lesson is in the mistake. I'm aware that you're not talking about professional collaboration, he said. Margaret smiled. Just a little. I'm talking about whatever it is, she said, which may be more than one thing at once. That's allowed. He didn't say anything to that. He watched his son fold a piece of paper incorrectly and then unfold it and try again. The shelter, he said. I'm ready to talk about it, if you are. Go ahead. He had done his homework in the way he did homework when something mattered. Thoroughly, without shortcuts. He had spent the week gathering specific information. The structural assessment the city had done 18 months ago, the electrical inspection report, the cost estimates for the roof repair that had been deferred twice for lack of funds. He'd had an independent contractor walk the building on Tuesday, after Emily had let him in on the understanding that this was information gathering and not a commitment to any specific action until Margaret said what she needed. He laid it out. Not as a proposal. As a picture of where things stood, what the building needed to remain functional, what it needed to remain safe, what it needed to keep operating without the constant low-grade crisis of infrastructure on the edge of failing. Margaret listened without interrupting. She asked two questions, one about the electrical timeline and one about whether the contractor Adrian had used was someone who had worked on occupied buildings before, because she was not interested in anyone coming in and disrupting the residents in a way that made the shelter feel like a construction site. He answered both questions accurately. Then she said, "Tell me what you're proposing." "I'm not proposing anything yet," he said. "That's what you're about to do. You're going to tell me what you actually need, and then I'm going to figure out how to resource it in a way that doesn't turn this place into something that feels like it belongs to me." She looked at him for a long moment. "The roof," she said. "The electrical. After that, the water heater, which gives us about 8 months before it becomes an emergency." She paused. "And the back room. Emily's workshop. She's been working in a space that's too small and too cold. If we could expand it, she could train other people. Right now, it's just her." "All right," he said. "Those are the building needs," she said. "There's also the operating budget. We run on a combination of small donations and a city grant that gets cut or reduced almost every year. We've never had stable funding. Stable funding would mean we could plan more than 3 months ahead, which we've never been able to do." "What does stable look like?" She told him a number. It was not a large number by the standards of what Adrian spent money on, and the contrast between its modesty and what it would mean for this building and these 20 women and these children hit him somewhere below the ribcage. "Done," he said. "Not done yet," she said. "I don't want charity. I want a partnership. I want this shelter to be connected to whatever foundation you set up in a way that means we have a voice in how it's run and what it prioritizes. I'm not interested in being a recipient. I want to be a partner." "Agreed," he said. "I also want it in writing," she said, "with a board structure that includes shelter representation, so that when you eventually hand this off to whoever runs your foundation, the terms can't be quietly renegotiated." He looked at her. "You've thought about this." "I've been doing this for 26 years, she said. "I've watched what happens when organizations like this one become dependent on a single donor who changes their mind or changes their priorities or dies. I'm not building something that collapses when you decide to do something different with your money." "That's what I want too," he said. "A structure that doesn't require me specifically to keep working." She nodded once. "Then we understand each other." "I'll have Shira draw up a framework," he said. "Nothing final. A starting document for us to react to together." "Bring Emily into that," Margaret said. "I was going to." "I know. I'm saying it because it matters that she knows I said it, not just that you decided it." He looked at her. "You protect her." "She protects herself," Margaret said, in the specific tone of someone making an important distinction. "I make sure the people around her understand who they're dealing with before they make the mistake of underestimating her." Across the room, Noah had finally gotten the paper bird mostly right. He held it up, and it was recognizably a bird, lopsided, one wing lower than the other, but a bird. He showed it to Kira with the unguarded pride of a child who has accomplished something through repeated effort. Kira looked at it seriously and then gave a single nod of approval, which clearly meant more to Noah than extensive praise would have. Margaret watched this. "Your wife," she said quietly. "She would have liked this place." He didn't trust himself to respond immediately. He let a moment pass. "Yes," he said, "she would have." What was she like? Nobody asked him that anymore. People who'd known her talked about her in ways that were more memorial than personal, and people who hadn't known her didn't ask because they thought it might be difficult. It was difficult. It was also something he missed, talking about her as a person rather than as an absence. "She argued about everything," he said. "Not combatively. She just thought out loud and expected you to keep up." He paused. "She was a social worker before Noah was born. She believed that systems were supposed to serve people, and when they didn't, she took it personally." He paused again. "She would have had opinions about the shelter, detailed opinions. She would have redesigned the intake process within the first visit." Margaret smiled. "I would have liked her." "She would have liked you," Adrian said. "She admired people who built things instead of just talking about building them." They sat in that for a moment, comfortable with the weight of it. Emily found him afterward in the main room, standing near the window watching the evening activity of the shelter. A toddler had attached itself to his right leg, in the way that very young children attach themselves to nearby adults, apparently without any particular reason, and Adrian was standing very still with the careful stillness of a man who is not certain what the protocol is for detaching a toddler. Emily watched this for a moment before she said anything. "His name is Marcus Jr.," she said. "He's 14 months. He does this to anyone who stands near the window." She crouched down and made a sound that caused Marcus Jr. to detach from Adrian's leg and redirect toward her instead. "He likes the light from outside." "Smart kid," Adrian said. She stood up with Marcus Jr. on her hip, which he accepted as a reasonable development. She looked out the window for a moment at the street, the November dark, the occasional passing car. "How was it with Margaret?" she asked. "Good," he said. "Real." He paused. "She doesn't let anything be less than what it is." "No," Emily said. "She doesn't." "She wants you included in the foundation framework process," he said. "Not just informed, included." Emily looked at him sideways. "I know what I want to be included in. I don't need Margaret to tell you that." "She said that too," he said. Emily almost smiled. Not quite, but close. "She told you I protect myself." She clarified the distinction. "Good." She shifted Marcus Jr. to her other hip. He was now examining her collar with the concentrated interest of a person who has found something worth investigating. "I had a conversation today, while you were in with Margaret." "With who?" "Janice Porter." She looked out the window again. "She called me. Not about the case. That's all settled. She's been clear about what she wanted, and she got it. She called because she's been thinking about something else." "What?" "She ran a training program at her last company before she came to us," Emily said. "Logistics, safety, and compliance. Informal, grew out of conversations she was having with newer workers, but she apparently had a real gift for it." She paused. "She's been wondering whether there's a way to set something up independently. A program for warehouse workers, not company-run, not management-controlled, that helps people understand their rights, understand how to document things, understand what retaliation looks like, so they recognize it before it gets as far as it got for all of us." Adrian was quiet for a moment. He looked at Emily, who was looking out of the window with the expression of someone who already knows where they're going with something and is giving the other person time to arrive. "That's part of what the foundation should be," he said. "That's what I thought," Emily said. "But I wanted you to hear it from me before I said yes to Janice, because it's your foundation." "It's not only my foundation," he said. "That's the point we just established in there." She looked at him. "Then yes. Tell Janice yes." "You tell Janice yes," he said. "You know her. You know what she needs to hear. I'll resource it." Emily shifted Marcus Jr. again. He had moved on from her collar to her ear, which he was now attempting to remove at its hinges. "Marcus Jr.," she said firmly. He looked at her with the total innocence of a person who has no idea what he's been doing. Adrian watched this interaction. He felt something that he recognized after a moment as something close to ease, the specific ease of being in a place that was not his and not requiring it to be, not performing anything, not managing the situation or the room or the impression being made. He hadn't felt that in a long time, possibly since before Elaine died, since before he'd been the version of himself that was always constructing something, even at rest. "What are you thinking?" Emily asked. He looked at her. She was looking at him with the direct gaze she used when she was actually asking, not making conversation. "I'm thinking that I've spent 3 years building things that mattered from a distance," he said. "Making decisions, allocating resources, running numbers. All of it real, all of it, I think, mostly good. But from the outside of it," he paused. "And I'm thinking that this room feels different from that." Emily looked at him for a moment. Then she looked down at Marcus Jr., who had given up on her ear and was now simply resting his head against her shoulder with the sudden totality of a child who has decided he's done for the evening. "It is different," she said. "The distance is useful sometimes. You can see things from far away that you can't see up close." She readjusted her grip on the sleeping weight of the toddler. "But you can't feel it from far away. And the feeling is part of why you keep going." He looked around the room. The women at their forms, the children in their contained chaos, The woman in the kitchen doorway who was laughing at something someone said, the specific texture of 20 lives being lived in a space that held them because someone had decided 26 years ago that holding them mattered. Yes, he said, I understand that now. The press conference was Sandra's idea, and Adrian initially resisted it. He'd been intending to handle the company's public communication through statements and the existing media coverage, which had been substantive enough. 3 local outlets, 1 regional business publication, the social media response to the company's post about Emily's case. It felt like enough. It felt like more than what he typically sought. Sandra had looked at him across his office desk and said, "It's not about what you want, Adrian. It's about the people who still work in that building wondering what this company actually believes about them. A statement is words on a screen. A press conference is a person standing up in a room and saying it out loud." He thought about Carol's face in the executive meeting when she'd said good. He thought about Thomas Greer starting back at work last Monday, 9 years of experience returning to a company that had just formally told him it had spent 8 months lying about who he was. "Thursday," he said. "Here, not at the warehouse. I want the employees who want to come to be able to come." Sandra made a note. "I'll arrange it." "And I want Emily to speak," he said. Sandra looked up. "Have you asked her?" "Not yet." "Ask her before you announce it," Sandra said. "Don't assume." He knew that. He called Emily that same evening. She picked up on the second ring, and he heard the shelter sounds behind her before she moved somewhere quieter. And he said, "I want to ask you something, not tell you something." "That's a notable opening," she said. "We're holding a press conference Thursday. I'm going to speak about the reforms, the foundation, the full picture. I'd like you to speak too, if you're willing." He paused. "But it's yours to decide. I'm not framing it as something you should want to do. I'm asking if you do." She was quiet for a moment. "What would I say?" she asked. "Whatever's true," he said. "What happened to you? What you want to happen for the people who come after you in that building. What the shelter does, if you want to talk about it." Another pause. "Can I say something about Margaret?" "Yes," he said. "Absolutely yes." "Then I'll do it," she said, "but I'm writing my own remarks." "I wouldn't have it any other way." "And I'm not going to be diplomatic about what Greer did," she said. "If I'm standing in a room talking about this, I'm going to call it what it was." "Good," he said. A brief silence. Then, "Okay." She paused. "Thank you for asking." "Thank you for saying yes," he said. He heard something in the background that was probably Kira's voice, and then Emily said, "I have to go. Someone's trying to use the cardboard saw unsupervised, which is not supposed to happen." "There's a cardboard saw?" But she'd already hung up. Thursday arrived with better weather than it had any obligation to provide. The sky had lifted overnight, gone from the pressed-down gray to something thinner and higher, and actual light was making an appearance, which in November in Detroit felt like a specific gesture. The conference room in the Ashcroft Logistics main office held 60 people, and it was full. Employees who'd arranged to come in early or on their day off. The board members. Sandra and her operations team. Shira in her gray suit. Carol from HR with the expression she wore when she was paying close attention to everything. 3 media outlets with cameras. The woman from the regional business publication who'd been covering the story and who'd emailed Adrian twice in the last week with specific questions that told him she'd done her homework. Thomas Greer was there, standing near the back in a jacket that was slightly too big across the shoulders in the way of clothes purchased for the occasion. He'd said 2 words to Adrian before the conference. "I'm here." It was enough. Dina Croft had driven in from Wayne County. She was sitting in the second row with her hands folded in her lap and the specific alertness of a person who is not going to miss anything. Ray DeLuca had not come. He'd texted Adrian that morning. "Not ready to be in the building yet, but I'm watching." Adrian had responded, "That's enough. Thank you." Janice Porter was in the front row. Emily came in through a side door 3 minutes before they were scheduled to start, wearing a dark blazer over a gray shirt that she'd clearly pressed specifically for today, and she moved to her seat without making anything of her entrance. She glanced at Dina and gave her a brief nod. Dina nodded back. There was something in that exchange, the shorthand of people who've shared a specific kind of damage and have come out on the same side of it, that Adrian saw from the front of the room and that he knew he couldn't entirely access from where he stood but could recognize as real. He spoke first. He had written his remarks and then rewritten them twice, and he'd eventually discarded the second revision because it was too polished in a way that felt dishonest. The version he delivered was closer to the first draft, less elegant, more direct, the kind of thing you say when you're not trying to sound like you're saying it right. He talked about what had happened inside his company. He was specific. He named the practices, the fabricated disciplinary records, the inventory theft, the retaliation against employees who noticed things they weren't supposed to notice. He did not soften it or frame it as a systemic failure that distributed responsibility across an abstract system. He said that it happened in his building, under his nominal oversight, and that his failure to look more carefully than he had was part of why it had continued. He watched the room while he said it. He watched Thomas Greer's face, and Dina's, and Janice's, and the faces of the 60 employees who were still here and were deciding right now what this company actually was and whether they believed it. He talked about the reforms, the worker advocacy function. Thomas Greer's name got a visible reaction from the people who knew him, a ripple of recognition and something warmer than approval. The independent audit cycle, the structural changes to the supervisory reporting chain that Sandra had architected and that would take 6 months to fully implement, and that he was committed to seeing through even when it became inconvenient, which it would. He talked about the foundation. He kept this portion shorter and less detailed because it was a starting point and he didn't want to announce something as finished that was still in construction. He said it would support workers, single parents, and families in crisis, and that it would be structured in partnership with the people it served and not administered from a distance by people who didn't understand what those lives felt like from the inside. He said Margaret Okafor's name. He said what she'd done for his family 28 years ago, and what it had meant, and what it meant now. He didn't dress it up. He said he'd carried the debt for too long and had come back to it sideways, through a situation he hadn't created but had failed to prevent, and that sometimes the door you should have opened long ago gets opened by someone else who isn't waiting for you to get around to it. He looked at Emily when he said that. She was looking back at him with the steady gaze she kept for things that mattered to her, and he couldn't read everything in it, but it wasn't cold and it wasn't performed, and for now, that was what he needed. He stepped back from the podium and said, "Emily Carter." She walked up. She had notes, but she didn't look at them. She set the paper on the podium surface and left it there. "I've been thinking about what to say for 3 days," she said, "and I keep coming back to one thing, which is that this is not a story about one man doing something wrong inside one company. It's a story about what happens when a system decides that certain people's words are worth less than other people's words, and then gives a man with bad intentions access to that system." She paused. Dennis Greer didn't invent the conditions that let him do what he did. He found them. He used them. And he probably found them because they'd been usable for a long time before he came along, and nobody had been hurt badly enough, visibly enough, to make anyone look at them directly. The room was very quiet. "I lost my job for carrying an empty box," she said, "and I want to be clear about what that actually meant. Not to me. I had savings, I had options, I had a community that would have held me. I want to be clear about what it meant to Thomas, who worked here for 9 years and spent 8 months wondering if he'd ever find his footing again. To Dina, who was 26 years old and had her professional record destroyed because a man needed a scapegoat. To Janice, who had 7 years in this building and will carry the record of what was done to her even after it's been formally corrected, because that's how records work in the real world. She looked at the room. Being cleared on paper is justice, but the time lost is not given back. The months of uncertainty are not given back. The way it changes how you see the place you work, the way it makes you smaller inside a system you have no power over, that's not given back. She stopped for a moment. "I'm not saying this to qualify what's happening today," she said. "What's happening today is right, and I'm glad it's happening. I'm saying it because the people in this room who still work here deserve to know that the standard being set is not the minimum that avoids liability. It's the actual thing, The thing where people who work in this building are treated as people who have contributed something that matters. And when something goes wrong, the first assumption is not that they did it. She paused one more time. There's a shelter on the west side of this city called Helping Hands. It was founded by a woman named Margaret Okafor, who is 74 years old and has been doing this work since before most of us graduated from high school. She asked me to tell you that the cardboard boxes are still welcome. A sound moved through the room that wasn't quite laughter, and wasn't quite something else, but was genuine and sudden and real. Emily stepped back from the podium. It wasn't a standing ovation. It wasn't a movie. People clapped, and some of them clapped hard, and in the second row, Dina Croft was doing the specific thing that people do when they're trying not to cry in a professional setting, which involves a particular arrangement of the jaw and the deliberate direction of attention at the ceiling. Thomas Greer, at the back of the room, was not trying to do anything except stand there, and his face showed everything he wasn't managing. After, when the media had what they needed and the formal part of the morning was over, and the room had gone from conference to something looser and more human, Emily found herself standing near the coffee table with Janice Porter, who had come to her immediately after the remarks. "You said it right," Janice said. "The time not being given back. You said that right." "I meant it," Emily said. "I know." Janice held her coffee cup with both hands. "I'm going to do the training program," she said. "I've been going back and forth on it for a week, and I'm done going back and forth." She looked at Emily. "You'll be involved?" "As much as you want me," Emily said. "It's your program. I'll support it." Janice nodded. Something settled in her face. Not happiness exactly, not resolution exactly, but the specific quality of a person who has been adrift for long enough that choosing a direction feels like solid ground under their feet. Adrian appeared beside Emily with 2 cups of coffee. He held one out to her. She looked at it for a moment, then she took it. "You said Margaret's name," he said quietly. "I said I would." "I know, He paused. "It was the right thing to say, in the right place." She looked at him sideways. "You're still surprised when things go the way they should?" "A little," he said. "That's because you spent too long doing things from a distance," she said. "When you do things up close, sometimes they go right. It's less shocking." He looked at her. "Is that advice?" "Observation," she said. They stood there for a moment with their coffee, in the room that was now moving around them, with the natural friction of people who have been through something together and are figuring out what comes next. The cameras were gone. The formal posture of the morning had released into something more honest. People talking to each other, actually talking, the kind of conversation that a room generates when the performance is over and what's left is just the people. Outside, through the conference room windows, Detroit was doing its November thing, enduring, unimpressed, entirely itself. The light that had shown up that morning was still making its case, thin and real across the buildings. Adrian thought about what Margaret had said. Someone stops for you. And then you spend the rest of your life paying it forward, or you spend it moving away. He had spent a long time moving away. He was here now. It wasn't the full measure of what he owed. He didn't think there was a full measure exactly. He thought it was more like a direction, something you walked in rather than a destination you reached. You kept going or you stopped. He had stopped for a long time. He wasn't stopping now. He drank his coffee in the thinning November light. In the room full of people he was slowly learning to understand. Beside a woman he was slowly learning to trust. And he thought, this is what it feels like to be in the right place and know it. He didn't say that out loud. He kept it. Some things you kept. 3 months passed the way the months after significant events tend to pass. Faster than expected on the surface, slower underneath, where the real work of change happens without announcing itself. December came and went. The DA's office filed charges against Dennis Greer on the 19th, theft, fraud, and tampering with company records across a documented period of 22 months. The number that appeared in the charging documents was $1.3 million, which was higher than Franklin's initial estimate because the full audit, once it had access to every record that Greer had believed he'd successfully altered or deleted, turned out to be more complete than Greer had counted on. His lawyer entered a not guilty plea at the arraignment and began the process of negotiating, which Shira had predicted, and which the DA's office received with the measured patience of prosecutors who had everything they needed and no particular incentive to hurry. C. Morrison, who had filmed Emily, entered a cooperation agreement. He was 24 years old and had been hired by Greer 8 months before the video and had spent those months doing exactly what Greer had asked of him while telling himself it wasn't really what it was. His testimony added 2 additional documented incidents to the existing record. The DA's office accepted the cooperation and reduced his exposure accordingly, which Adrian had complicated feelings about and which Shira told him was the correct outcome for the strength of the overall case. And she was right, and he knew she was right, and he still had complicated feelings about it. The 2 shift coordinators who had filed false incident reports in support of Greer's cases were terminated and referred for separate proceedings. One of them had worked for the company for 11 years, which made the termination neither easier nor harder. It was what it was. The reforms Sandra had laid out began their 6-month implementation on the 1st of January, with the specific deliberately unglamorous quality of institutional change that is actually happening rather than being performed. New reporting structures. The independent audit cycle, run by a firm with no prior relationship to Ashcroft Logistics and selected by the board on criteria Adrian had made publicly available. The worker advocacy function, now formally established, with Thomas Greer in the role that Emily had suggested him for. Thomas had taken some convincing. He'd come back to the freight floor in November with the careful bearing of a man who has been hurt in a place and is deciding, one day at a time, whether the place can still be trusted. He'd worked 3 weeks before Adrian had asked to meet with him, and in that meeting Adrian had said, "The advocacy role is yours if you want it, but I'm not asking you to take it as a reward or as a way of closing a chapter. I'm asking because Emily says you're the right person, and I've learned that when Emily says someone is right for something, she's usually seen something real." Thomas had looked at him across the small conference table and said, "Can I think about it?" "Yes," Adrian said. Thomas thought about it for 4 days and then came back and said yes. By February, he'd already handled 6 separate employee concerns that would previously have had no formal channel, and 2 of them had turned up practices in the supervisory chain that weren't criminal but were problematic enough to warrant internal review. Sandra used both cases in the first training cycle she ran for new supervisors. She called the training cycle "Accountability is Not a Threat," which Adrian thought was a title that said what it needed to say. The shelter's roof was repaired in January during a week when the weather cooperated just enough for the contractors to finish before the next round of cold came through. Margaret supervised from her chair by the window, which had been moved temporarily to a different room while the most intrusive part of the work happened directly above the main space. She had opinions about the contractor's approach to the ridge flashing that she conveyed through Emily, who conveyed them to the foreman with the diplomatic precision of someone who has learned to translate between 2 very particular kinds of authority. The foreman adjusted the flashing. The electrical panel was replaced in February, the water heater in March. The workshop expansion happened over 3 weekends, with a combination of contracted work and volunteer labor, the latter including Adrian, who spent 2 Saturdays on what turned out to be light carpentry tasks that were within his limited competence, in which he performed without complaint and with a minimum of visible frustration when things didn't go the way he expected. Noah came the second Saturday. He spent most of it following Kira around and learning a great deal more about cardboard construction than most 7-year-olds accumulate in a lifetime. The expanded workshop was done by mid-March. Emily stood in the finished space and looked at it for a long moment without saying anything. It was not a large room even now, but it had 2 proper work tables instead of 1, better ventilation, adequate heating, and shelving that was actually secured to the wall instead of leaning against it and hoping. "Well?" Adrian asked from the doorway. She turned around. "It's good," she said. "That's it? What do you want me to say?" "I don't know." Something with more than 4 letters. She looked around the room again, at the 2 tables and the proper lighting and the shelf where the completed cribs were already lined up. "When I built the first crib," she said, "I was sitting on the floor of the old workshop at 11:30 at night with cardboard everywhere, and my hands were cut from the scoring tool, and I had no idea if it was going to hold a child's weight." She paused. "I still don't know what made me keep going. I just kept going." She looked at him. "This room means more people can keep going. That's the thing with more than 4 letters, if you want it." He was quiet for a moment. "I'll take it," he said. She went back to the work table and picked up where she'd left off, which was her way of telling him the moment was complete. He didn't try to extend it. He was getting better at that, reading where the edges of things were and not pushing past them. The foundation's legal structure was finalized on the 14th of February, which Adrian thought was either the best or worst possible date depending on your perspective, and which he did not mention to Emily because it felt like information that could be easily misread. He mentioned it to Margaret instead, who said, "That's either a sign or a coincidence," and looked at him with the sideways attention of a woman who had lived long enough to find both equally interesting. The structure was what they'd agreed on in December. A board with 7 members, 3 of whom were required to have direct personal experience with the populations the foundation served. Margaret held one of those seats. Emily had declined a board seat formally, but had accepted a role as an advisory consultant on program design, which was functionally more influential than a board seat and required less sitting through governance meetings, which Emily had described as her reasoning when she explained her decision to Adrian, and which he believed completely. Janice Porter's training program was the Foundation's first funded initiative. It launched in late February in a rented community space in the New Center neighborhood. 12 participants in the first cohort, warehouse and logistics workers from 3 different companies, all of them coming in on Saturday mornings to learn what their rights looked like in practice, what retaliation sounded like when it started, how to document things in a way that held up, and what resources existed that the people who benefited from workers not knowing their rights were not in the habit of advertising. Janice ran it with the specific combination of warmth and no-nonsense that Emily had recognized in her from their first phone call. By the end of the first cohort, 2 of the 12 participants had used what they'd learned to address situations in their own workplaces that they'd previously endured in silence. One of those situations resolved internally. The other one didn't, and the worker ended up filing a formal complaint with the State Labor Board, and the complaint was upheld. Janice called Emily when she got the news about the second one. "She did it herself," Janice said. "I just gave her the vocabulary." "That's what the vocabulary is for," Emily said. She told Adrian that evening. He was at the shelter, which had become a regular Wednesday thing that had evolved without either of them quite deciding it was a regular Wednesday thing. He was sitting at one of the folding tables in the main room, helping a woman named Patrice navigate an online job application that kept timing out, which was less about his technological expertise and more about his patience with systems that behaved badly, which was considerable. Emily sat down across from him and told him about Janice's call. He looked up from Patrice's laptop. "Good," he said. "That's it?" she said. "What do you want me to say?" She looked at him. Something moved in her face that was close to amusement. "Fair," she said. Patrice, who had been watching this exchange with the interested attention of someone who has been in a shared space with 2 people long enough to understand the subtext, said nothing. She was 41, she had 3 children, she had been at the shelter for 5 weeks, and she had an extremely accurate read on the rooms she moved through, which was a survival skill, and also just who she was. Adrian went back to the application. Patrice's session timed out again. He started over without commenting on it. The trial date for Dennis Greer was set for the fall. In the meantime, the civil discovery process produced additional documentation that the DA's office incorporated into the case file. And Greer's lawyer shifted from not guilty to exploring plea options in late March, which Shira reported to Adrian in a brief call with the specific tone of someone delivering expected news that is nonetheless satisfying to deliver. "What kind of plea?" Adrian asked. "Too early to say," Shira said, "but they've stopped pretending the evidence isn't what it is." "Will the victims be consulted?" "The DA's office will go through the formal victim notification process," she said. "You'll want to loop in the individuals who have standing, particularly the former employees, so they can participate if they choose to." He called Thomas first, then Dina, then reached Janice through the Foundation's contact line because he didn't have her personal number anymore, and it felt wrong to go around channels. Ray DeLuca had gradually re-entered the picture over the months. He hadn't taken the job back. He was still in construction, but he'd come to the press conference in the end, just not in the room. He'd watched the live stream that one of the media outlets had posted. He'd texted Adrian 3 weeks later. "I watched it. It was the right thing. Thank you. Adrian had saved that text without entirely knowing why. He called Ray. I heard about the plea talks, Ray said. He knew somehow, which Adrian didn't examine too closely. What do you think is going to happen? I think they'll reach a deal that results in a conviction and real consequences, Adrian said. Not what he would have gotten if it went to trial. But real. Ray was quiet for a moment. Real is enough, he said. I don't need it to be maximum. I need it to mean something. I think it will, Adrian said. Okay, Ray said. And then in the way he had of adding things as afterthoughts that weren't afterthoughts at all. Is the woman still at the shelter? Emily? Yes. Tell her I think about that phone call sometimes, the first one. What she said. He paused. Tell her it mattered. Adrian told her that evening, standing in the doorway of the expanded workshop while Emily cut cardboard with the scoring tool, her hands moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who has made this motion hundreds of times. She stopped cutting. She was quiet for a moment. He said that? She asked. Exactly that. She looked down at the cardboard on the table. Then she picked up the tool and went back to what she was doing. But her face had changed slightly, in the way that faces change when something lands in the right place. He watched her work for a moment and then went back to the main room. April brought the kind of weather that Detroit produces once or twice a year. 3 days in a row of genuine warmth, the air carrying something that remembered summer, even though it was only April and summer was still 2 months of uncertainty away. People came outside with the slightly dazed quality of city residents who had been indoors too long and needed to reacquaint themselves with the existence of sky. On the second warm day, Adrian took Noah to Brightmoor. Not to the street where they'd grown up. He'd done that drive in October, alone, as its own thing. This time he took Noah to a small park that he half remembered from childhood, a block and a half from where he'd grown up, that had a particular tree in it that had been old even in 1996 and was still standing, which Adrian found genuinely surprising and also right. The tree was a large oak, maybe 80 or 90 years old, its roots pushing up through the ground around it in the complicated way of old trees that have been growing in one place long enough to reshape what's around them. In the fall and winter, it would have been bare. In April, it was just beginning, the first pale green suggestion of leaves, tentative and new, the specific vulnerability of early spring. Noah went directly to the tree the way children go to things that look interesting and put his hand against the bark and looked up into the canopy. It's old, he said. Very, Adrian said. Did you come here when you were little? Sometimes, Adrian said. When things were hard at home, I used to come and sit under this tree. He paused. I don't know exactly why. It just felt like something that had been there longer than the hard things, and that made the hard things feel less permanent. Noah looked at him. Did it work? Mostly, Adrian said. Some. Noah considered the tree for another moment, and then sat down at the base of it, leaning against the root that arched up from the ground on one side like a natural seat. He pulled his knees up and looked at the park around them. Empty on a Tuesday afternoon, the swings moving slightly in the April air, a grocery bag caught in a fence at the far end doing something that was almost peaceful. Adrian sat beside him. The root was not comfortable, but it was solid. Dad, Noah said. Yeah. The lady, Margaret, she said something to me last Wednesday. Adrian looked at him. What did she say? Noah pulled at a loose piece of bark on the root, not destructively, just examining it. She said that your mom, my grandma, she was very brave. She said being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and asking for help anyway. He paused. She said Grandma Patricia was the kind of person who could do that, and that's why you turned out the way you did. Adrian looked at the sky above the tree through the pale new leaves. He had not told Noah very much about his mother's illness. Noah knew his grandmother had been sick when Adrian was a child, knew that she had died when Noah was 1 year old and therefore had no memory of her, knew that she had worked hard and loved Adrian and would have loved Noah too. These were the broad outlines. The interior of it, the arithmetic of the refrigerator, the 2 jobs, the specific way Patricia Ashcroft had carried a burden that would have broken many people and had gotten up and made breakfast at 6:30 with the radio on anyway, He hadn't given Noah yet. He'd been waiting for Noah to be older. He'd been waiting for himself to be ready. He wasn't sure he was ready now. But Noah was looking at him with the patient attention of a child who has asked a question and is prepared to wait as long as it takes. Your grandma was very brave, Adrian said. She worked 2 jobs when I was your age. We didn't have a lot, but she was always there, and she always made things feel like they were going to be okay, even when they weren't okay yet. He paused. She was scared a lot. She just didn't let the scared make the decisions. Like you, Noah said. I'm still learning that part, Adrian said. You're better at it than you used to be, Noah said, in the matter-of-fact tone of a child reviewing a parent's progress report. Margaret's influence, Adrian said. And Emily's, Noah said. Adrian looked at him. Noah shrugged with the elaborate casualness of a 7-year-old who knows he's said something pointed and is trying to seem like he didn't mean to. She's there every Wednesday, he said. And you go every Wednesday, and you're different on Wednesday nights. Different how? Less in your head, Noah said simply. Adrian sat with that for a moment, under the old oak in the April warmth, in the park 1.5 blocks from the house where he'd grown up, and 1.5 miles from where the shelter stood, and where everything in the last 6 months had slowly, imperfectly, irreversibly changed. He thought about his mother. He thought about Margaret sitting in her chair by the window and telling him that Patricia had been the good kind of stubborn. He thought about a specific Saturday morning in 1996 when he was 11 years old and Margaret Okafor had sat at his kitchen table and explained algebra to him with the patience of someone who understood that a child who is hungry and frightened cannot think about equations until the hunger and the fright are addressed, and then she had addressed all 3 things simultaneously without making any of it feel like charity. He thought about what it had cost her to do that. Not money, time, attention. The specific resource that cannot be replenished once spent. She had given it without accounting and without expectation. And here was the result. A man sitting under an oak tree in April, imperfect and late and doing the work anyway, with a son beside him who was turning out, Adrian thought, with the unsteady pride that fathers feel when the evidence arrives. To be someone who paid attention to the world and had opinions about it and was not afraid to say them. You're right, Adrian said. About Wednesdays. Noah didn't say I told you because he was not, at his core, a kid who needed that. He just shifted slightly and leaned against his father's arm, which was the gesture he'd been making since he was small enough that Adrian could hold him in one hand, and which he still made just differently now, with more weight and more intention. They sat there for a while. The April air moved through the new leaves above them, and the tree was very old and very solid. And the city beyond the park fence was doing what it always did. Enduring, building, failing, rebuilding, not waiting for anyone's permission or acknowledgement to keep being itself. Emily called him that same evening. He was home by then, Noah fed and doing homework at the kitchen table with the specific reluctant concentration of a child who would rather be doing literally anything else but has accepted the inevitability of multiplication tables. I need to tell you something, she said when he answered. He heard something in her voice that he was learning to recognize, not the calm she maintained by default, but the version of it that was thinner, worn to near transparency by something she was carrying. I'm listening, he said, and moved to the back porch so Noah couldn't hear. Margaret had another small stroke, Emily said. Last night. She's stable to... I want to say that first. She's stable and the doctors are not concerned about the immediate term. But... She stopped. But, he said. She's 80% of what she was 2 months ago, Emily said. That's what the doctor said. Not in those words, but that's what it meant. A pause. She knows. She's completely lucid, which is, in some ways that's harder, because she's aware of exactly what's changing. Her voice stayed level, but only barely. She's not afraid. She said she wants to make sure the shelter is settled before she can't make sure anymore. It's settled, Adrian said immediately. I know it is, Emily said. I know it legally. I know it structurally. I know the funding is in place and the board is functioning and the programs are real. I know all of that. She stopped. She needs to feel it. There's a difference between a thing being true and a person feeling the truth of it, and right now I need her to feel it. What does she need to feel it? He asked. Emily was quiet for a moment. She needs to see what it's going to be when she's not running it, she said. Not a plan, not a document. She needs to see the room full, and the people doing the work, and the structure holding without her in the middle of it. Okay, he said. There's a dinner, Emily said. The shelter does it once a year in the spring. All the current residents, the long-term volunteers, the people who've moved through the shelter in the last year and stayed connected. It's informal. It's always been Margaret's thing. She hosts it. She sits in the middle of it. It's her way of taking stock. A pause. It's in 3 weeks. I want it to be bigger this year. I want it to be evidence. Tell me what you need, Adrian said. I need you to come, she said, and I need you to bring the board members who should understand what this place actually is, and I need... She stopped herself, started again. I need Noah to be there, because when Margaret looks at Noah, she sees something continuing. I don't know how to explain that better than that. I understand it, he said. The rest I can manage, she said. I just needed to tell you about Margaret, and to ask. You didn't have to ask, he said. You knew I'd say yes. I know, she said, but I asked anyway. A brief pause. Because that's how I do things. I know, he said. It's one of the things I... He stopped himself. She waited. He decided to say it. It's one of the things I've come to count on, he said. About you. The pause that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of pause that has something in it that both people in the conversation can feel but have not yet named out loud, and neither of them was in a rush to name it right now. 3 weeks, Emily said finally. 3 weeks, he said. She hung up. He stood on the back porch for a moment in the April evening, his phone in his hand, and listened to the city. The dinner was on this first Saturday in May. Margaret had been consulted on everything and had vetoed 3 of Emily's ideas and added 2 of her own, which was a sign of how she was feeling. Not recovered, not the same as before, but present in the specific way that Margaret was always present when she'd decided a thing mattered. They'd moved furniture in the main room to accommodate 40 people. Long tables instead of the usual folding arrangement. Actual tablecloths, not linen, but decent, that Kira had sourced from a donation center and pressed with an iron that was approximately as old as she was. The women currently staying at the shelter had organized the cooking across 3 days, which produced a spread that was specific and personal in the way that communal cooking is when the people doing it have something to celebrate. People came who hadn't been to the shelter in months or years. A woman named Della, who'd moved through the shelter 4 years ago and now had an apartment in Dearborn, and a daughter in 1st grade, and a job she'd been promoted in twice. A man named Joseph, one of the few men Margaret had ever bent her policies for. A single father with twin 6-year-olds who'd had nowhere else to go during a custody crisis 3 years back, who came with the twins, now 9, who went directly to Kira with the ease of children who know exactly where the center of operations is. Board members came. Emily had told them this was not a formal event, and they were not here to observe but to participate, and they had either understood that or had understood it would be better to behave as though they did. Janice came with 3 participants from the first training cohort, which hadn't been planned but was the right thing. Dina came, Thomas Greer came, and his wife came with him, a woman named Patricia, which caught Adrian a second when Thomas introduced her, the name landing in a particular way, who had the steady, observant quality of someone who has watched her husband go through something difficult and is still taking the measure of whether the other side of it is what it looks like. Adrian arrived with Noah at 6, which was when Emily had told him to arrive. She was in the kitchen when they got there, in a dark blue dress that was the first time he'd seen her in something other than work clothes or the flannel shirt, and she was covered in what appeared to be gravy, which she was addressing with a kitchen towel and an expression of focused irritation. The lid came off, she said, without looking up. Do you need... I need 5 minutes and a different towel, she said. Noah, there's a whole chaos of children in the main room. Kira is allegedly supervising. Noah went. Adrian found a clean towel and handed it over without comment and retreated to give her the 5 minutes. When she appeared in the main room 10 minutes later, the The gravy was gone, and she'd done something with her hair that was slightly different than usual. And she moved through the room the way she moved through every room she'd decided to be responsible for, efficiently, noticing everything, making small adjustments, stopping to say something real to each person rather than the managed version of something. He watched her for a moment. He watched her kneel down to say something to one of Joseph's twins that made the child laugh. He watched her put her hand briefly on Della's arm when Della said something quietly, and the specific quality of that touch, like present without being heavy, the touch of someone who understands that sometimes the point is just to make contact. He watched her find Margaret across the room and check on her with a look, just a look, the wordless language of people who have spent enough time together that the words are optional. Margaret was at her usual chair, which had been moved to the center of the room for tonight rather than the window corner, so she was in the middle of everything. She was wearing a deep green dress and a necklace that was probably significant, and she was talking to Della with the complete attention she gave to everyone she talked to. And she looked, in this light, in this room, like someone who was exactly where she had always intended to be. Adrian went to her when the opportunity presented itself, between conversations, and crouched down beside her chair so she didn't have to look up. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Old," she said, which is accurate and not a complaint. She looked around the room. "Look at this. Did you see Della? Her daughter looks exactly like her." "I saw," he said. "When Della came here, she hadn't slept in a week," Margaret said. "She was afraid of everything, not because she was weak, because she had been through things that made fear the intelligent response." She paused. "Now she's here with a daughter who has never needed to be afraid the way her mother was afraid, because Della made sure of it." She looked at Adrian. "That's the work, you understand? Not Della coming through the shelter, Della's daughter never needing one." He understood. He thought he'd been understanding it gradually across these months, the way you understand things that are true at a level that can't be reached all at once. "Noah's here," he said. "He's been looking forward to it all week." "I know," Margaret said. "He told me on Wednesday. He said Kira promised to show him something." A pause. "Kira has taken him under her wing, which is good for both of them." "She's good with him," Adrian said. "She's good with everyone younger than her," Margaret said. "She's been here 4 months and she's already teaching the younger children things. She knows she's doing it. She's not unconscious about it. She has an instinct for passing things on." Margaret looked at him. "You should know that her mother's job situation has stabilized. They'll be moving into their own place next month." "Emily told me," he said. "I know Emily told you," Margaret said. "I wanted to tell you too, because you helped make that possible and I want you to hear it said directly." He was quiet for a moment. "Margaret," he said. He wasn't sure how to continue. He started again. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the direction you walk in, rather than the destination you reach." He paused. "I don't think I'm going to run out of reasons to keep walking. Not now." She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were the same as they'd always been, clear and direct and containing, as they always had, the particular quality of someone who has been paying attention to people for 74 years and has arrived at a sophisticated understanding of what she sees. "No," she said. "I don't think you will." She reached out and put her hand briefly over his. Her hand was smaller than he remembered, but the grip was the same. "Your mother would be proud of you, not of the money, of this." She gestured with her chin at the room. "Of the fact that you're here, in a room that doesn't benefit you professionally, sitting next to people you didn't know 6 months ago, and you look like yourself." He didn't say anything. He sat with it. "Go find your son," she said. "This is a party." He found Noah in the workshop. Kira had the whole thing set up for a demonstration. 4 children of varying ages, including Joseph's twins, arranged around the main work table, and Kira was at the front with a piece of cardboard and the practiced authority of a person who has found something she's good at and intends to be taken seriously about it. She was teaching them how to build. The scoring technique, the fold sequence, the way the layers reinforced each other when they were arranged correctly. She was 13 years old and she was explaining structural principles with the vocabulary she'd developed from Emily over 4 months of Saturday afternoons. And the children around the table were listening with the focused attention that children give to something when the person teaching it clearly believes it matters. Noah was at the far end of the table. He had his piece of cardboard and his scoring tool and his tongue between his teeth, and he was attempting the fold sequence with the concentrated effort of a boy who does not want to be the worst one in the room. He wasn't the worst one. He was actually keeping up. Adrian stood in the doorway for a moment without announcing himself. He watched Kira correct one of the twins gently. Show him again. Watch him get it. He watched Noah look up at Kira for confirmation after a fold and receive a brief nod that clearly satisfied him. He thought about Kira at the door the first night he'd come. The flat assessment, the 12-year-old testing whether he was worth the door being opened. He thought about what Margaret had said about her instinct for passing things on. He thought about Emily, somewhere in the main room right now, making sure everything was right for a woman who had made everything possible for this building. Carrying the weight of Margaret's diminishment alongside the logistics of a party and the governance of a foundation, and the production of cardboard cribs that held sleeping children whose mothers had arrived with nothing. He thought about what it meant to be a person who carries that weight and keeps going. Not because it's easy, not because they're exceptional in the way stories sometimes need people to be exceptional, but because someone stopped for them once, and they understood what that meant, and they decided that the right response to being saved was to stay in the room where other people needed saving and not leave until the work was done. He thought about what he'd said to Noah in the car, months ago. Someone stops for you and you stop for someone else. That's how the whole thing holds together. He still believed that. He believed it more now, having seen what it looked like in practice. Not the clean version, not the version where the debt is paid in a single dramatic gesture and everything resolves into clarity. The actual version. The version where you show up on Wednesdays and you answer the phone when it matters and you sit with the hard things instead of managing them from a distance, and you are still not doing it perfectly, and you keep going anyway. Emily appeared behind him in the hallway. She leaned against the wall beside the doorway and looked into the workshop at Kira's class. She's good, Emily said quietly. She's you, he said. In about 15 years. Emily looked at him. Watching things, he said. Figuring out how they work, passing it on. He paused, not waiting to be asked. She was quiet for a moment. That might be the nicest thing you've said to me that didn't also have a qualifier attached to it. I've been working on the qualifiers, he said. She smiled. It was a real one. Not the quick flash he'd seen in the break room the first night, but something slower and more considered. The smile of a person who is deciding to let something land. Margaret's okay in there, she said. She's been talking to Della for 20 minutes, and she looks the most alive she's looked since... She stopped, started again. She looks like herself tonight. I know, he said. I saw. They stood side by side in the doorway and watched Kira demonstrate the corner fold to two children who were paying close attention. And Noah looked up from his own piece, caught his father's eye, and held up his work. A rough but recognizable beginning of something structural, corners folded in, edges aligned, not beautiful but solid. Adrian gave him a thumbs up. Noah went back to work. He's going to want to do this every week, Emily said. Probably, Adrian said. I'll manage it. That's not a hardship, she said. I know, he said. That's what I mean. She looked at him for a moment in the way she looked at things she was still deciding about. Not closed, but careful. He'd learned the difference over these months. Emily Carter did not give things easily, not because she was withholding, but because she understood the weight of what she gave and gave it accordingly. He didn't rush it. He didn't perform patience either, which was its own kind of pressure. He just stood there, beside her, in the hallway of a shelter that was 40 people tonight instead of 20, humming with a specific alive quality that was the sound of people choosing each other in the middle of difficulty. I should go check on dinner, she said. Dinner's fine, he said. She paused. It is fine, she admitted. She didn't move yet. The sounds of the main room carried through the building. Voices, children, someone who had found the old radio in the corner and turned it to something with a slow rhythm that floated under everything else. Margaret's laugh, once, clear and specific, the laugh Adrian had started listening for because it was the measure of how she was on a given night. This turned out right, Emily said quietly. not triumphantly, just as a thing that was true and worth saying. Most of it, he said. Some of it is still in process. She looked at him. Some things take longer, he said. They're worth waiting for. She understood what he meant. He could tell by the slight shift in her expression. Not a flinch, not a step back. Something more like recognition. The look of someone who has been walking carefully in uncertain terrain and has just found solid ground under the next step. She didn't say anything. She nodded once, in the particular way that she nodded when something was settled but didn't need commentary. Then she went back to the main room. He stayed in the doorway for a moment longer, watching Kira teach the corner fold, watching Noah hold his practice piece up to the light and examine it with the critical eye of a 7-year-old who has decided to take something seriously. The building was 40 people tonight. Next month it might be 35 or 45. Some of the women here would move into their own places in the next few months. Some of them would be back because that was how things worked. Not in straight lines, not in clean progressions, but in the complicated spiraling way of real lives that don't have screenwriters. What the shelter would be for them was not a resolution. It was an interval, a place that held them while they found their footing so they could walk back out and try again. That was enough. That was the whole point. He thought about what Margaret had said. That's the work. Not Della coming through the shelter. Della's daughter never needing one. He thought about Noah in the workshop, learning to build something that could hold a child's weight. Not because someone told him it was important, but because he was in the room where it was happening and he was paying attention. He thought about a promise made by an 11-year-old boy on a doorstep in Brightmoor in 1996 that had taken 28 years and a woman with a cardboard box to come back around to its reckoning. He didn't think the reckoning was finished. He didn't think it was supposed to be finished. The point was not to close the account. It was to stay in the relationship, with the people, with the place, with the ongoing, imperfect, essential work of being someone who stops. He had stopped. He was staying stopped. That was what he had to offer in the end. Not the money, which was real and necessary and would have been nothing without everything else. Not the foundation, which was a structure that would outlast him if it was built correctly, and he intended to build it correctly. What he had to offer was his attention, which was the thing that could not be delegated, the thing that Margaret had given him in 1996 and that Emily gave to every person who came through the shelter door. And that was, he understood now, the actual currency of the work. You paid with your presence, you paid with your time. You paid with the decision, made again every Wednesday, to be in the room. That was the whole of it. That was what connected things. Adrian Ashcroft, 32 years old, standing in the hallway of a shelter on the west side of Detroit on a May evening, with 40 people in the next room and his son learning to build something in the room in front of him, understood this not as an idea but as a fact. The kind of fact that lives in the body rather than the mind, that you cannot unknow once you know it. He was not the same man who had followed a woman home in October because something she did in a break room reminded him of a debt he'd been carrying. He was not finished becoming who he needed to be. Both of those things were true, and he held both of them, and walked back into the room where Margaret was laughing at something Della's daughter had just said with the unselfconscious authority of a 6-year-old, and the dinner was on the tables, and the radio was playing, and Kira was bringing Noah out of the workshop with his practice piece in his hands and the look of a kid who has made something and knows it. "Dad," Noah said. "Look." Adrian looked. It wasn't beautiful. It was rough at 2 of the 4 corners and slightly uneven along one edge, and the scoring on the side panel was a little deep. But it held its shape when Noah set it on the table, and the structure was sound, and when you pressed down on it gently, it did not collapse. "That'll hold," Adrian said. Noah beamed with the uncomplicated pride of a kid who built something with his hands and had it confirmed. Margaret, from her chair at the center of everything, watched this exchange and said nothing. She just smiled. The dinner went long, the way the good ones do. Past 9, past 10. The kind of evening that nobody wants to end because the ending of it means going back to the parts of life that are harder and less warm than this room full of people who have chosen each other. Eventually, inevitably, it wound down the way it had to. Children drooping against parents' shoulders, the table gradually giving up its dishes, People finding coats and saying goodbyes that took longer than goodbyes usually take. Margaret was the last person seated. She sat in the center of the thinning room and watched everyone leave, and her face held the specific expression of someone who is doing an accounting of what they've built and finding that it is, against all odds and after all of it, enough. Emily sat beside her when the last guests were gone and took her hand. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. Then Margaret said, "Good, just that." Emily squeezed her hand. "Yes," she said, "good." Outside, the May night had held some of the warmth of the day, which was a gift Detroit offered occasionally and without predictability. Adrian walked Noah to the car across the shelter parking lot, the boy half asleep on his feet, his cardboard practice piece tucked under his arm because he had not been willing to leave it. "Dad," Noah said, getting into the car with the slow movements of someone operating on the last reserves. "Yeah, buddy." "Can we come back next week?" Adrian buckled him in. "Yes," he said. "We can come back next week." Noah was asleep before they reached the end of the block. Adrian drove home through the May Detroit night, through the city that had made him and broken him and remade him in a shape he was still learning the edges of, and he thought about what it meant to be, at 32, finally, genuinely in the right place. Not because the right place was perfect. It wasn't. The foundation had governance problems they hadn't solved yet. Thomas was still finding his footing in the advocacy role. The shelter's back porch needed work they hadn't gotten to. The legal case against Greer was going to take months more to resolve, and whatever the resolution was, it wasn't going to undo what he'd done to the people he'd targeted. And that was something everyone in the story was going to have to live with in their own way for a long time. And he, Adrian Ashcroft, was still, on certain Tuesday mornings, on certain nights when Noah was asleep and the house was quiet, still the man who had been moving away from something for 28 years. That didn't disappear. It became part of the account. But he was also the man who had come back, who was still coming back, who had stopped running the math of what he owed and started doing the work of paying it, which was a different kind of arithmetic, the kind that doesn't end with a zero sum, but keeps generating something. True wealth, Margaret had told him once, is not measured by what you accumulate. It's measured by what you protect. He'd written that down. He'd meant to remember it before now. He remembered it now, and that would have to be enough, and somehow, improbably, incompletely, genuinely, it was.